00 hours on the 3rd of October at the Manekshaw Center in New Delhi, where you will have 72 hours to successfully deploy this critical element of the Indo-Pacific Oceans Initiative. You may use any means necessary to obtain actionable policy forward strategies to enable safe, stable, and secure access to resources while skillfully navigating the prevailing geopolitics for nations operating in the Indo-Pacific. If you or any member of your team is caught.
Welcome to the concluding day of the 2024 edition of the Indo-Pacific Regional Dialogue. Touching upon many critical matters over the past 2 days, I hope has been an absorbing experience for all of you. Now, in the hopes to excite you and engage you with renewed gusto, here is a peek into what the forthcoming session holds for all of us. Enjoy.
And ushers in the fourth professional session of the IPRD 2024, where Australia's perspective of resource geopolitics being manifested in West Asia will be juxtaposed against indigenous voices from a wide swath encompassing troubled Israel and moving southwards through Kenya, Tanzania, and South Africa. The promise of abundant marine resources is heavily shadowed by rising threats along the shores of southern and eastern Africa. Illegal fishing fleets deplete vital stocks, while drug traffickers exploit the vastness of the sea. Climate change brings rising tides and unpredictable storms. The influences of China and Russia present both opportunities and challenges for South Africa, placing it at a pivotal point with its advanced maritime capabilities and aspirations to become an international maritime center. Will it lead the region in securing these waters before external powers deepen their foothold? In West Asia, the strategic waters of the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden are lifelines of global trade. Yet, the Yemen crisis rages on, intensified by competition over resources and strategic positions. Saudi Arabia and the UAE seek to secure their interests, while allegations of Iran's support of the Houthi rebels adds layers of complexity to the security of these vital shipping lanes. The Eastern Mediterranean has become a crucible of new rivalries. Beneath its waters, vast deposits of natural gas are fueling geopolitical shifts. As Turkey vies for control and Russia muscles its way into the region, the balance of power teeters on the edge. Will diplomacy prevail, or will resource competition deepen the divides that already exist? On the eastern edge of Africa, Tanzania and Mozambique gaze towards a horizon filled with promise. With proven offshore natural gas reserves of 57 trillion cubic feet, it is poised to become a significant energy hub. Yet, with China investing heavily and Western energy companies staking claims on the same resource pool, it faces the challenge of safeguarding its wealth while fostering development. Rich in fisheries and endowed with significant offshore oil and gas reserves, Kenya emerges as a beacon along the eastern African coast, attracting much global attention. Maritime disputes with Somalia test its diplomacy, while partnerships with the United States and members of the European Union present it with support and complexity in nearly equal measure. With China extending its reach through investments, Kenya must balance foreign interests with national priorities, aiming to lead in maritime security and resource management for the region's benefit. As global powers, regional rivalries, and the inexorable demands of progress converge in these waters, these regions seek triumphs while navigating a world where external influences and internal ambitions constantly collide. The choices made today by these nations will resonate far beyond their shores, affecting global trade, environmental sustainability, and geopolitical stability. Will they steer towards collaboration, harnessing their resources for collective prosperity? Or will the tides of competition and external pressure pull them into deeper waters of uncertainty? Join us as we delve into these critical issues and carve pathways to a more equitable form of resource-driven geopolitics, whose end state is, indeed, security and growth for all in the region.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, we are privileged to have among us General Anil Chauhan, PVSM, UYSM, AVSM, VSM, SM, Chief of the Defense Staff, and Secretary, Department of Military Affairs. We are privileged, sir, to have you address us on this morning. Sir, may I kindly request you to come up on stage and deliver your special address. General Anil Chauhan is being escorted on stage by Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, DG NMF, and Admiral Karambir Singh, Chairman NMF.
Admiral Karambir Singh, former CNS and Chairman of National Maritime Foundation. Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, Director General, National Maritime Foundation. Serving and retired officers of the armed forces, defense attachés, diplomats, dignitaries from friendly foreign countries, friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning to every one of you. At the very outset, let me thank the National Maritime Foundation for inviting me to deliver this special address at the Indo-Pacific Regional Dialogue 2024. Last time, I had addressed the Indo-Pacific Regional Dialogue in November 23. It's a privilege, actually, to be addressing it for the second time in a row. First, let me compliment the Indian Navy for promoting their vision for enhancing their strategic outreach and for ideating and brainstorming on critical issues affecting maritime security through dialogue, conclaves, symposiums, and seminars, such as this one, IONS and the Goa Maritime Conclave. I also would like to appreciate the splendid efforts put in by the National Maritime Foundation in spreading awareness about the contemporary challenges to maritime security, need for regional cooperation, and most importantly, for reiterating something that I have also been always advocating, that there's an ocean of opportunities that lie in the maritime domain. Since its inception in 2018, Indo-Pacific Regional Dialogue has carved a niche for itself as a premier event concerning maritime security, drawing admiration and impressive international traction. Successive editions of IPRD have had excellent discussions on the 7 pillars of Indo-Pacific Oceans initiatives. These pillars have constantly propounded the need for regional and global security. You're all aware, out of the 7 pillars of IPOI, India is the lead country in 2 of these crucial initiatives. One is maritime security in concert with the UK, and second is disaster risk management, reduction and management in partnership with Bangladesh. These 2 pillars, I believe, complement India's vision for Sagar, that is security and growth for all in the region. In fact, our Prime Minister's vision for Sagar is being duly implemented by the Indian Navy in a true sense, actually, by forward mission-based deployment and carrying out anti-piracy, humanitarian rescue missions in the Arabian Sea. I'll just recount for the audience 2 major events out of the number of what has happened. The first is on 26th of January 24. Marshall Islands flagged merchant vessel Merlin Luanda was carrying 90,000 tons of naphtha, sustained a missile attack and was put on fire. The nearest ship available that time was INS Visakhapatnam, and without even second thoughts, the ship was deployed next to it, and a couple of our people boarded the ship and held the members of this merchant vessel to extinguish the fire, putting their own life at risk. The second incident is all well known. It's about MV merchant vessel Ruin. It's a Malta flag merchant vessel that was hijacked by Somali pirates. And of course, it was being commandeered by them. And this was intercepted by INS Kolkata. For this intervention, we had to fly in Marcos from the mainland, and they carried out a drop almost about 1,400 nautical miles away with the help of the Indian Air Force. And this actually was a major event, actually. So despite the risk involved, the Indian Navy has responded to the distress call and provided succor to the affected merchant vessels with alacrity and aplomb. Intervention by most nations, actually, who are deployed in this particular region, have been frequent to actually protect their national interests. Not very many nations have put their life at risk of their naval personnel in the interest of humanity. India has done it not once, on many such occasions. I have just recounted only 2 of those incidents. These type of operations, one we carried out against MV Rohini, were possible because of enactment of the Maritime Anti-Piracy Act 2022. This actually gives the legal authority for Indian Navy actually to carry out such kind of operations. And in this case of operations of MV Rohini, we are able to get all those pirates actually to Indian shores and took them to law and took them to the court of law. So all this has been possible. What we've been saying, and what Prime Minister has been saying about Sagar, has been made possible not only by legislative action by the government of India, but duly supported by the actions of the Indian Navy. And that, I think, is a truly Sagar kind of an initiative, that is security for all in the region. In its scope of the activities which we are carrying out and the depth and the range of the operations. So India believes actually that oceans are a global common and must be accessible to all. They are the lifeline of global economy. This belief is not new actually. This has been ingrained into the Indian philosophy since mythological and historical times. Indians have always revered the oceans. Indian mythology has accorded them a status of a life giver and prosperity provider. We have always worshipped actually Varuna. It's similar to Poseidon or Neptune actually, as the universal monarch who controls rainfall, rivers, and the oceans. His blessings lead to prosperity. India's ancient history actually is replete with examples that signify the importance of seas and Indian Ocean. Classic texts like Arthashastra mention the role of port commissioners and harbor masters, indicating the relevance of shipping and ports to an empire which was actually located in north of India, in the mainland. Indian western coast, we had Dholavira, Bet Dwarka, and Lothal that were important military ports for the Indus Valley civilization. The Mauryan Empire also used ports in today's Gujarat to trade along the Moroccan coast up to the Persian Gulf and Mesopotamia. On the eastern seaboard, the Cholas, Pandavas, and the Kalingas established trading posts in present-day Java, Sumatra, Thailand, and Cambodia. This commercial and military connect diffused into cultural interactions, leading to spread of Hindu and Buddhist epics, the culture, and epics like Mahabharata and Tamil literature in this particular region. I actually believe that geography has a very important role to play in the strategic outlook, development of strategic outlook of any nation. And now I'll be talking about the geographical perspectives. So ancient and medieval India were bereft of access across the Himalayas actually, because they were difficult in those ancient days, and were content to look at oceans actually for trade and growth, examples of which I just mentioned actually. The geographical barriers of past have been enlarged to geopolitical barriers of current times, making India some sort of an island nation and forcing it to look at the oceans once again. I'll deliberate upon this particular aspect of geography a bit later, once more in my talk. History also has a role actually in shaping the outlook of nations. Unfortunately for India, 2 successive waves of colonial rule compelled India to develop a land-centric kind of an outlook. All the successive rulers of Delhi Sultanate, whether it's from Mamluks, Khiljis, Tughlaqs, Sayyids or Lodi dynasty, all came from the northwest. Even the Mughals came from there, the same geographical area, and forcing the successive rulers of various dynasties to orient towards Central Asia and Afghanistan, thus neglecting the growth of maritime power, the hallmark of ancient India. This was all happening at a time actually when European powers, having discovered the route through the Cape of Good Hope, were coming to the shores of India and were making forays to the Southeast Asian countries. The Marathas actually, they were located in Deccan. They tried to remedy this particular situation by Shivaji Maharaj and of course his lieutenant, Kamboji Angre. But I think it was a trifle too late actually, and the colonial powers were over here. The British too, they were established colonial power by the time they came to the shores of India. And initially, if you recall, they established the presidencies on the coastal areas, Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras. It's later on that they shifted the capital to New Delhi. And again, this was because by this time they're fearing actually the Tsarist threat from Central Asia because of the Great Game which was occurring over there. So they were again forced to look towards the north and northwest actually of India. On independence, India inherited disputed borders both towards north and with China and toward the west with Pakistan over Jammu and Kashmir. The immediate threat and the wars that followed again forced India to have a kind of a continental outlook. However, deep inside India's mind and India's psyche, the importance of oceans remained. This was only aroused by strings of pearls kind of a strategy and debate on talks like Malacca Dilemma and the physical initiatives manifesting in Maritime Silk Route, BRI, CPEC, etc. And there, some kind of a potential great game kind of happening in the Indian Ocean region. Today, India realized the harsh reality that in spite of being physically joined to the Asian landmass, geopolitically, it remains a kind of an island nation. Notwithstanding that, India has endowed and attributes to play a major role in the maritime domain. Its position uniquely in the confluence of three seas at the heart of global trade routes connecting the continents of Europe, Africa, and Asia. So in some manner, in this maritime domain, again, India is blessed by geography and the attributes of which I'll say. So India has a peninsular shape, which is jetting out in the Indian Ocean region, and gives us a prominent shape geographically. Is flanked on the two sides by island territories of Lakshadweep and Andaman and Nicobar. They are not only outposts, but they also provide depth to the mainland. In this whole Indian Ocean region, we are all aware that entry points to the ocean are limited actually towards the straits of Malacca, Sunda, Lombok, and Ombi-Watar, and on the west towards Hormuz, Bab-el Mandab, and the Cape of Good Hope. And this area is located with a number of littoral states that look to India as a first responder and a preferred security partner. So hence India enjoys geographically actually a predominant place in the Indian Ocean region. Even history helps to help India in an important role. India has had always good maritime relations with nations that are in the Indian Ocean region from the ancient times. So, to my mind, though India's primary security threats may emanate from the land borders, its destiny and future opportunities lie in the oceans. And therefore, it's imperative for India to balance out the continental and maritime priorities. Continental for the security and neutralization of threats, and maritime for exploitation of emerging opportunities. And in future, it must be prepared to play the gate game if it so manifests in the Indian Ocean region and the Indo-Pacific. Having said that, let me talk about security. India does not believe in countering anyone in the region. Our ideology has always been rooted in the concept of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which means that world is a family. India remains committed towards promoting security and stability in the Indian Ocean region and the Indo-Pacific region through enhanced cooperation, mutual understanding, interoperability with the maritime forces of friendly foreign countries. India views the wider Indo-Pacific region as part of a continuum that stretches from the Mediterranean Sea and the Northwest African coast in the west to the West Pacific Ocean and South and South China Seas in the east. For us, Atlantic, Pacific, and the Indian Oceans are indivisible and part of our collective growth and responsibility. If we introspect deeply, India's history and destiny remains entwined with that of countries located in the region. I describe the Indo-Pacific. The unique USP of this particular region is that it is shaped by institutions and individuals. It is for this reason that the Indo-Pacific can be called as a community of concepts, a unique place where tangibles like nation states, merchants, navies, fishermen, marine ecology coexists with intangibles like ancient trade routes, UNCLOS, issue-based alliances, freedom of navigation, climate change issues like this. There's no rigid security architecture in the Indo-Pacific with states creating and maintaining interest-based alliances and groupings. Indo-Pacific is hence a collaboration of multilaterals, minilaterals, and plurilateral arrangements. From the traditional security challenges arising out of geopolitical developments, I believe that the Indo-Pacific region also faces an increasing number of non-traditional threats and security issues like cyber threats, terrorism, transnational crime, natural disasters, and pandemics. Among others, climate change and demographic changes are serious concerns that's likely to affect all of us in future. Global warming may witness the rise of ocean levels, and climate change may induce more severe cyclones and hurricanes and storms in the future. Human migration, illegal trafficking may give rise to interstate tensions besides intra-community conflicts. Through medium of this forum, I wish to assure our friends and partners that Indian Armed Forces are willing to work with resident nations and international partners in countering the adversities introduced by climate disasters and help in capability building for national response. India has also lent its technical expertise and a wide array of experience for a broader capability building for countries in the Indo-Pacific. This includes in diverse fields such as solar power, preservation of maritime ecology, sustaining of blue economy, development aid, cybersecurity, fintech, hydrography, maritime and marine survey. The moot question is for our neighbors is why should we work with India? And what's the important advantage of working with India? India has a vision to become a developed nation by 2047. For this, a secure and strong India is actually a concept which is intrinsic to this particular goal of ours to become a developed nation. A strong and secure India will be able to contribute wholesomely to all domains, that is diplomatic, economic, technological, or military. A strong India is not a threat or a competitor, but may be seen as a stabilizing factor. It will provide security environment for Sagar, is ready to work with friends and partners. As far as the armed forces are concerned, we all aware that we are in a process of kind of transformation, and we want to learn from the experience of others who have already done it in this particular region, and we are ready to share our experiences with all those militaries who want to transit in this kind of a role. India has always been a Vishmitra and has sincerely believed in sharing knowledge with the rest of the world. In olden days, the merchants, traders, students from all parts of the world came here in India to gain knowledge. The universities of Takshila and Nalanda were possible MITs, Yales, Harvards, and Oxfords of today. Our academia and research organizations are striving to regain that past glory and to emerge as a global educational hub. Indians, since time immemorial, have taken pride in their cognitive abilities and imaginative thinking. We have always had the vision to think beyond the present. India gave to the world the concept of zero, which in itself is a very revolutionary kind of a concept. How can you think of something which does not actually exist? It evolved the decimal system. It pioneered research in astronomy and astrology when not much was known in this field globally. This pioneering research by Aryabhatta and Brahmagupta in the field of mathematics and astrophysics laid the foundations for algebra, trigonometry, and the heliocentric model of the solar system. Today, actually, India is now a talent hub once again. It has got the largest number of STEM engineers who graduate from our universities. We also have the third largest startup ecosystem in the world, and leveraged together with properly supported our demography and enterprise, we can propel economic growth, not only of our region, but the entire region, of not only of our country, but of the entire region. India's academicians and entrepreneurs can find solutions to global problems. The region's growth trajectory and India's desire to be a developed country by 2047 is predicated on the continued access to natural resources, critical minerals, and markets. This in turn requires freedom of navigation and freedom from threats in the oceans. This is where we all need to focus and we all need to work together. The world today is also undergoing a marriage kind of a violent churn. It's passing through an era of geopolitical flux, and it may not be incorrect to say that the world order is presently in a state of disorder and is witnessing one of the most violent phases since the end of World War II. I started this talk giving you some examples of Indian mythology, and toward the end of my talk, actually, I'll again look towards Indian mythology. In Indian mythology, there's a mention of Samudra Manthan, the churning of the oceans, actually. Something similar is that what we're witnessing today in the global geopolitical arena. It's a competition between the powerful contestants. In the Indian mythology, it was between the Devas and the Asuras, the right and the wrong. The churning took place on a pivot of instability in a very unstable kind of a world. That was on a tortoise, which was the Lord Vishnu in his avatar. And the resultant product of this was actually Amrit, the exhalation of life, and Hala Hala. That's a very, very powerful kind of a poison. What we're witnessing today is something similar that divides the contestants between good and the evil. The winner is likely to be provided by the Amrit. However, the vanquished doesn't have to swallow the poison. That there was a solution which Indian mythology found for that again. So this particular ongoing what's happening in the global geopolitics is something similar to what's happened in Samudra Manthan. The Indo-Pacific is a shared reality for those who dwell in it. It is not merely a call for arms or a battleground for competing ideologies. This is the reason why we, the resident powers, had to be proactive, assertive, and cooperative in ensuring a free and open Indo-Pacific while remaining cognizant of the threats and challenges that manifest over here on a daily kind of a basis. We all have to find a win-win kind of a situation for all, like the Samudra Manthan. The Indo-Pacific, as I said earlier, is a community of concepts, and it is our intention that it remains a peaceful one. At the end, it remains for me to thank the organizers and dignitaries present and the participants for curating this year's edition of the Indo-Pacific Regional Dialogue. I am sanguine that the ideas shared here would enable development of more cohesive, robust, and sagacious policy frameworks towards ensuring credible maritime security, growth, and prosperity for all in the Indo-Pacific region. I wish you all great success in all your future endeavors. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, and Jai Hind.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, we are delighted to announce that General Anil Chauhan, Chief of the Defense Staff, has consented to release the latest issue of the Maritime Affairs Journal. The Maritime Affairs Journal is a flagship journal of the National Maritime Foundation. Maritime Affairs publishes well-researched and informative articles on issues relating to the sea. Each issue presents studies and research material from across the globe on issues contextual to oceanic activity like shipbuilding, maritime security, port development, and so on. This particular issue is a voyage in time from the Cholas to the contemporary issues in the simmering Indo-Pacific. I am delighted to request Commodore Debesh Lahiri, the executive editor of this issue, to come up on stage. Sir, may I now request you to kindly do the honors. Thank you, sir. May I now request Admiral Karambir Singh, Chairman NMF, to present General Anil Chauhan, the Chief of Defence Staff with a token of our gratitude and appreciation. Thank you, sir. May I request all dignitaries on stage to please resume their seats in the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking General Anil Chauhan, Chief of the Defence Staff. Thank you, sir. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we will move into the fourth professional session proper. May I request all the moderators and speakers of this session to join us on stage. We have once again a brilliant lineup of speakers: Dr. Hassan Khanenje, Dr. Tumeni Gurumo, Captain Sean Andrews, Mr. Timothy Walker, and Rear Admiral Shaul Chorev will be joining us online. We have an illustrious moderator by way of Mr. Deepak Shetty. Their biodatas are in your conference booklet. Please do go through them. I now hand over the proceedings to the moderator, Mr. Shetty.
Admiral Karambir Singh, former Chief of Naval Staff and incumbent Chairman of the National Maritime Foundation, Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, Director General of the National Maritime Foundation, senior officers of the Indian Navy, both serving as well as retired, excellencies, distinguished guests, scholars, students in particular, to whom I would like to give a big shout out for being here in such large numbers. And ladies and gentlemen, it's an absolute privilege and honor for me to be here amidst all of you this morning to navigate and steer the course of the proceedings of this professional session number 4 in the course of the next 2.5 hours or thereabouts. Ab initio, I would like to express my profuse gratitude to the Ministry of Defense, Government of India, the Indian Navy, and the National Maritime Foundation, its entire team, but singularly to Admiral Karambir Singh, as well as Vice Admiral Pradeep Chauhan, for the very, very gracious gesture extended to me to be here amidst all of you today. I'm also delighted by the in-person presence of my very, very distinguished panelists. And of course, we also have another illustrious luminary joining us online. So welcome to all of you as well. I think I'd like to use this occasion to sort of convey to you a very pleasant tiding. I'm sure several of you are already cognizant of the fact that and it's a universal recognition that the UNCLOS is the mother convention or the constitution of the ocean governance framework. Taking a cue from that, as on 25th of September this year, India has signed the Global Oceans Treaty, or the High Seas Treaty as it's alternately called, or the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdictions, the BBNJ. Call it whatever you like. And I'm very sanguine that this will also culminate in the ratification of this international instrument into our own national legislation pretty much soon. In stark contrast, I wanted to just share a piece of stats, which is 14 countries worldwide yet have signed the convention, but have not ratified it as yet. And if that's not all, 16 other nations have not only not signed, but also not ratified. So much for the commitment to ocean governance and responsible resource management. I would also like to sort of take you and sort of present to you, I think a lot of data has been shared as to the criticality of ocean governance and resource management. But I think what stands out is the estimated cumulative value of the ocean resources is estimated to be around $3 trillion per annum, and that is around 5% of the global GDP. It is also widely believed that around 2 billion plus livelihoods are supported on the back of this framework. I think it's also imperative for me to sort of take you back in time as to the level of responsibility and responsiveness, if anything, in a very negative sense, of what happened back in Somalia. You're aware Somalia is a failed state since the year 1991, and two singular developments have contributed to the abysmal state of affairs in Somalia, even as we speak, well over 3.5 decades down the line. One, of course, is the IUU, illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing. And if that was not bad enough, you had dumping of toxic waste in the waters, completely depriving all potential opportunities for the youngsters of Somalia to eke out a living. So that's a lesson in history that we need to bear in mind, because as the adage goes, seldom does mankind ever learn from history. And if we don't, I think it's only to our peril. The other nuance which I wanted to share with you is directly in relation to maritime security in the domain. Having dealt with it in my own erstwhile capacity as Additional Director General of Shipping for 4 years, and eventually as Director General of Shipping for 2 years subsequently. I was literally parachuted in the midst of raging piracy of the coast of Somalia. And having seen that from the civilian perspective, I shudder to think, in fact, there was a reference to the maritime militia, which is getting deployed by state actors. But visualize a scenario where you could have potentially mercenary pirates. At the end of the day, they're all mercenaries. So they're all there for the moolah. So imagine if they were requisitioned or commandeered by state actors to be their sword arm, as it were, and then you could have all mayhem break loose and make nonsense about all the ocean governance that you could potentially think. I do believe that you would do scenario building, keeping in mind this attribute as well. I deem it appropriate, given the background that I come from the civil service, having spent the last 6 years of my career in the National Maritime Administration, which is the Directorate General of Shipping, the flag administration of India, to share with you some nuggets in relation to maritime shipping. And I'll bring you the connect and I'll drive it home pretty soon. But before that, I just wanted to share the simple fact that 95% by volume and 70% by value of all EXIM goods, export-import goods, merchandise goods, that is traded on the back of merchant ships. That's a no-brainer. I think it was also shared by Dr. Eva Pessoa yesterday. But the stark fact remains that there is an enormous sea blindedness, a complete lack of awareness in terms of the contribution of merchant shipping to your daily lives. Virtually everything that you deal with back home or in your professional sphere is all serviced by merchant ships and the vast swathes of seafarers who man these ships. So that's a challenge which we are up against, even in terms of ocean governance, and I'll come to that in a while. I'm reminded of an adage, it was an actual statement, which is now part of maritime folklore, as it were, Admiral Efthymios Mitropoulos, who served 2 terms as the Secretary General of the International Maritime Organization and is currently the Secretary General Emeritus of the IMO, he once famously said, "But for shipping, half the world would starve and the other half would freeze to death." I think that very pithily drives home the criticality of merchant shipping, and which is what I wanted to share with you, because I think various other facets have already been deliberated in the course of the last 2 days, and I'm sure much more will be in the course of the sessions to follow. While on this, again, I need to sort of, pardon me for being fairly data savvy in that sense, wanted to share with you just sheer basic 2 sets of numbers. There are roughly around 0.12 million merchant ships which are plying their trade globally today. And they are constituting around 11.2 million gross tonnage. If you look at the typology of vessels which are there, the large segment of them are tankers and product carriers, which represent about 14% of the overall constitutive merchant ships. And about 5.6% are container ships. And of course, then you have the whole other range of them. $14 trillion is what is laden on the back of merchant ships annually in terms of merchandise goods. Now, if you contrast this with around a global GDP of $87 trillion, this is back in 2019. That's the last data that I could cull out. And this source is the International Chamber of Shipping. That gives you a sense that around 20% of the global GDP is driven on the engines of merchant ships worldwide. Having stated all this, I also wanted to sort of flag a couple of issues. You're aware that in the blue economy paradigm, there are 4 major blocks, and one of the pivotal ones is maritime transportation, which subsumes not just merchant ships, but also the entire port infrastructure globally. In the exposition of Dr. Peshawar yesterday, she alluded to 3 blocks, 3 pillars, and all of them, to my view, are hardware issues. One is merchandise goods, the second being ships per se, the third ports, which is the hard infrastructure. But lest we forget, there are 2 other dimensions to this which constitute the soft element. One of them is, of course, the all-important seafarer, who, to my view, he is central and pivotal to the entire global international trade and commerce. If we really are looking to build structured ocean governance, please bear in mind the role and the essential nature of seafarers. And this has been expounded time and again as a fevered pitch to declare them as essential workers. And unfortunately, but for a few countries, not too many have deemed it appropriate to do so. We have seen it all during COVID times when virtually the globe came to a standstill. It was the seafarers who were driving ships all over and delivering merchandise to all of you back home. There are other facets which are allied to this. The enormous discomfort of, given the fact that there are long voyages, going up to about 11 months on a typical contract for a seafarer. But when it is at the point of interface at the port side, the seafarer faces enormous challenges. For instance, he's up against a range of public agencies, be it customs, immigration, port administrations, maritime administrations, port state control, flag state control, port health. They are subject to enormous discomfort. For instance, just to flag a few, shore leave is a major challenge. Sign on and sign off of seafarers is a humongous challenge in itself. And I'm not even alluding to vast levels of corruption which plague the system. And while on that, I must also mention that when you're looking to enable an ecosystem of ocean governance, please also be mindful of the entire logistics supply chain network, which means not just ships, also the ports, but also all that happens in terms of the processes. The processes are largely cumbersome. Let's say you extract all these seabed minerals and you get them back. Clearances are a challenge in the port, through customs, etc. So what we need to address is a range of business process re-engineering, BPR as we call it, or substantive systems changes. A lot of it is happening on the ground. We have the National Logistic Policy, the National Logistic Portal, which is underway, which bids fair to do all of it fairly seamlessly on the electronic medium, but we still have a very long way to go. The reason why I chose to flag this is also for you to bear in mind that these are some of the elements that we need to work at. And I'll just sort of pause here before I come back later in my closing remarks. When I refer to the seafarers, there is also an imperative need to look at sort of, rejigging their entire process of learning, education, and training. Under the STCW Convention, the Standards of Training, Certification, and Watchkeeping, which sort of is the overarching pivot under which a seafarer is trained, and this is an international legal instrument of the International Maritime Organization based at London, the UN Global Shipping Regulator. Today, we have a very opportune moment in time when we will look to address this core theme. The STCW Convention is being rewritten. Hopefully, if all goes well, fingers crossed, come 2028 or come 2030, you will have an entirely new STCW Convention in play. And if you're able to pitch this in the various delegations which India leads at the IMO, hopefully we can put across even the resource geopolitics into that. I think probably that will serve the entire shipping industry and have it in good stead over a period. What I will do is, for now, I will just sort of pause here by just flagging another issue. Please bear in mind that today, in an era where international institutions, and pardon me for being very hypercritical about this, and I'm not wanting to be derogatory or pejorative about what I'm saying, but I think international institutions have become virtually effete, as it were, if I can put it. They're absolutely innocuous, and it's time that we look at the sort of a new governance architecture for them, but that's a humongous challenge. That's for a discourse on an altogether another different day. But that said, please bear in mind that when you come up with all of this, the geopolitics pertains to resources, you will also be confronted by a huge wall of tariff barriers on the one hand, which will be at play to try and deter imports and exports. Concurrently, there will be another regime of non-tariff measures, NTMs as we call it, or non-tariff barriers, NTBs. So these are various nuances which we need to be mindful of and build it into the kind of ecosystem that we look at. With that, I'll pause for the moment. I'm absolutely delighted and thrilled to be here with my fellow panelists. Before I invite them on stage in sequence and no particular order of priority at all, and just wanted to flag, may I urge you if you could just kindly bear in mind 2 ground housekeeping rules. One, needless to say, this has been reiterated by the MC as well, that please conform to the 20 minutes allotted. I'm very, very averse to applying the guillotine, but push comes to shove, I mean, I'll probably have to do that. The second, can I urge you that since this is a forum of international stature, and I think one of the underpinnings is that if we can come up with even 1 or 2 strands of tangible recommendations which are doable, if you can sort of flag it and park it, I think that'll be so much the better. Without further ado, I will now request the first speaker. Allow me a moment, please. Yep, and that is Mr. Timothy Walker, Senior Researcher and Maritime Project Leader of the Institute for Security Studies in Pretoria, South Africa. And he will be addressing us on maritime resource geopolitics and security of the Southern and Eastern Africa, opportunities for South Africa. Just sort of trying to underscore here that we are pivoting in moment from the various geographies which the various sessions were devoted to yesterday, to West Asia, the waters of the West Asian region, Southern Africa, East Africa, all the way up to a huge swathe of water, right up to Australia. Thank you. Over to you, Mr. Walker. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. I'm delighted to be here. Thank you very much to the National Maritime Foundation and the Indian Navy and the Ministry of Defence for inviting me here. I was honoured to be able to address a previous IPRD, I believe in 2021, during the height of COVID. And I am so thrilled that what I had to say then and maybe the impact of what I said then can continue maybe into the future as well, and to be asked back here is wonderful. It's a very auspicious time as well. We've heard many, I think, milestones, upcoming dates, upcoming significant maritime issues around things like treaties and ratifications, like we've just heard now from the chair, making it absolutely integral that collaboration and maritime cooperation underpin or anchor a lot of what needs to be taken as international relations going forward. I just want to make sure I stick to time. Africa is going to play a tremendous part in that process as the continent with the largest number of sovereign states. Ratifications of international treaties, charters, even soft law negotiations and informal convenings of what will be taken as maybe customary international law and norms depend on or are contingent upon not just African participation, but ratification in the process as well. And one thing which is not part of my slides, but I highlight as well, is that Africa is fast becoming one of the youngest of the continents in terms of population number and size. And most of those people, it is predicted, will be in urban settings, and those urban settings are very likely to be in coastal areas going forward as well. So the future that we at the ISS are continually trying to advocate greater awareness of and planning for is for that young maritime future in which Africa plays a tremendous part. And you mentioned just now as well the pivotal geographies, or how we're pivoting from geography. And I'm very glad, because it gives me a lovely segue into my first photo. These are presentations mostly of pictures, because I do find, and I'm sure you agree, that the maritime domain in terms of maps, infographics and photos is very striking in terms of its visuals. It also stands in a lot for a lot of visual shorthands. You see a paper on trade, even if it doesn't necessarily deal with shipping, but often the photo used to illustrate the paper might be containers inside a port or ships docking in a port. There's always a maritime dimension to many of the issues, which even if it's implied or it's not very obvious to those who have not seen the maritime dimension yet, that we know that there is a maritime underpinning it. Now, this photo of the Earth, and if you've seen any of my presentations before, including the photo or the video of me several years ago with the long hair, this is one of my favorite photos. It was taken from the Apollo 17 spaceship in 1972. What we've been talking about a lot is ships, and this is from a perspective from a different kind of ship, a different perspective of the world provided. Now, this was the orientation of the Earth through which the window of the spaceship that the astronauts took the photo. So when they looked at the Earth, this is what they saw. Almost every subsequent depiction of the planet flips it around. It turns it so the north is at the top, and it does provide a very different perspective. Not all my photos will be upside down, so don't worry about that. But I do like looking at the Earth from this perspective, and also bearing in mind the context, which was 1972. If we look at it, for instance, I think the blueness of the planet is much more amplified. I should have perhaps had them side by side for comparison, but please do look it up as well. The Blue Marble is the name of the photo. It's very good depiction of, we might say, the extreme weather conditions, the roaring 40s and the furious 50s, which exist beneath South Africa and indeed part south of the Indian Ocean around Antarctica, which have a tremendous effect, not just on the conditions within those oceans in terms of climate, currents and waves and winds, but around the world as well. And when I mention history, 1972, this time the Suez Canal was still closed, and it was closed until 1975. ships had to transit, if they were going from east to west or west to east, around the Cape of Good Hope. Interesting as well, just the Cape of Good Hope seems to have been named by somebody with rather a wicked sense of humor, given how dangerous it is. 1972 was also a time at which the decolonization of Africa had proceeded, where most states were newly independent, had been for 10 years or at least a decade. But there were several parts of Africa in this photo which were not decolonized. And in fact, actually one of them, which is not really visible, but has recently become a major news story, which I'm sure you're aware of, is the Chagos Islands and the Diego Garcia base. But most of the areas within this photo had been decolonized, apart from many of the islands and the coastal enclaves, such as Djibouti and mostly of Mozambique, which we can see right in the middle here. Another reason I like this photo is no matter which way I pivot it, Southern Africa is always in the center, so I can always put it whichever way I want. But also the Mozambique Channel, which links up to, I think, the speakers from Tanzania and Kenya, because that is the common connection, the seaway, which is uniting, I think, a lot of the conversation that we'll have today, but also of interest to other parts of the Indian Ocean, indeed India, as I think we'll discuss shortly. And finally, 1972 was the year before UNCLOS negotiations started. And the law of the sea prior to that was felt by many African countries and newly independent Asian countries too as not fit for purpose, as suiting an old order and in need of reform. It took a long time for UNCLOS to be negotiated and to come into force, but nevertheless, as we've heard for the last 2 days, it forms the anchor and the overarching framework for our discussions and continues to do so. And that there are new charters or new treaties being added and negotiated around that. Oceans being one of the few multilateral areas where multilateralism indeed seems to be thriving in a sense, but nevertheless also struggling, as we've heard too. So perhaps just adding to what Dr. Christian Bürger said yesterday in terms of the 3 ways of thinking now about the oceans, there's another one here I would just add maybe to that, which is to, when it comes to maritime, turn received wisdom on its head. Look at the world in different ways. When it does, you see obviously the same planet, but there are different aspects of it which might have been missed from that initial perspective and the longer term perspective required as well, which always help understand the present and indeed where it's possible to go in the future. Now, the subject of the rest of my discussion is obviously on South Africa and the Southern African area, and I think it's a good illustration to show the extent of which South Africa has a responsibility over ocean areas, which it unfortunately is struggling to be able to provide that capacity. There are many, many accidents in this area, as I mentioned, the Cape of Storms or the Cape of Good Hope. And the area over which it has a sense of responsibility, or indeed perhaps jurisdiction at times, makes it a challenge. And indeed, it can only be done with international cooperation in terms of coordination from South Africa in many respects over this area, but also with industry, with other nations as well, in fusion centers or in coordination centers. And Southern Africa is, in that regard, a rather pivotal space. I'd also just want to add, and I should have mentioned this in the previous slide as well, that South Africa, in terms of its maritime context, and it sounds very similar to what we've heard, or what I've heard and taken from many of the discussions around Indian history, is it is effectively, well, not effectively, but there is a great degree of sea blindness, which we would all, I think, like to discourage and indeed dispel. There's this ambivalence towards the oceans and seas, which seems so paradoxical, given how dependent we are upon them, and indeed how much we are, as Dr. Bürger said yesterday as well, intensifying those activities as well, and how crucial they are. South Africa has a fascinating maritime context, which actually, prior to the states and indeed perhaps Homo sapiens, millions of years there had been evidence of people living on the coastline of South Africa, evidenced by enormous shell middens and even ancient fish traps, which have been discovered, showing that early humans, early people, came to the coastline and have indeed been there ever since. A subject which, like I say, is always worth delving into, just to go show how much our links to the seas and oceans are crucial. And I think linking to the previous slide as well, and right now going through this, and I have another slide with the marine traffic around South Africa. In fact, I probably go to that next. The Suez Canal was closed in 1970s, as I mentioned, until 1975, which created a huge amount of traffic around the Cape of Good Hope. We see that indeed today as well. In fact, I think that's one of the similarities between history and today. The amount of traffic and indeed the relationship between the Suez Canal and South Africa. The Cape of Good Hope was a major maritime transport route between East and West, opened up 500 or so years ago. But it has declined in significance, but it remains perhaps the only open, and indeed maybe natural or non-artificial one, where there are canals which cut across isthmuses in South America, or indeed the ice caps melting. Unfortunately, in the Arctic Circle, open up sea routes, this remains the one which is impossible to close, except if you were to sail, as you see from the initial photo, too far south and encounter those horrible storms, which are only intensifying in severity, as we've heard with cyclones and typhoons elsewhere in the world, because of the effects of climate change. This was taken, AIS marine traffic, a few days ago. I'm not going to delve into too much, just to highlight the area southeast in the map of the grey area, the grey noted ships. These are ships which were not identified, but were tracked by satellite, and their position was noted. The fusion of new technology, or indeed the fusion of new technology with AIS to predict pathways, is proving a real benefit in being able to identify suspicious activities at sea. And these are worth flagging because they are just outside South Africa's exclusive economic zone. And many ships do turn off their signals, their transponders, or spoof them, or in some way try and evade surveillance to enter and fish waters. And I know this is a problem throughout the world. And it's one of those things where you think that the common problem therefore does encourage or engender a common solution. And even if this is very far away, the fact that so many vessels are now, or countries are reliant on the Cape of Good Hope, or will be at least for the short to medium term as well, shows that there is tremendous international interest. But also I think it's worth noting in terms of international interest, when you have accidents, and this photo I'm sure familiar to everybody of the Wakashio in Mauritius in 2020, I'm concerned could be a more common sight in the future for several of the reasons I mentioned. The weather conditions are worsening. The traffic in terms of volume and number is increasing too. The Cape of Storms is a terrible place sometimes to sail. Already this year, there have been hundreds, over 100 containers lost overboard of cargo vessels and ships going around there, creating additional hazards to navigation. Never mind if there is crew or navigational issues. And one of the big things as well is liability. There's going to be a tremendous, not just global cost, but cost to the people on the coastal areas such as this. And this photo could be very similar to previous accidents that have happened off South Africa, in which we've actually been, I would say, rather fortunate, in which oil has drifted out to sea. It's not often washed up on shore. Unfortunately, it does seem to take an action to which we have to react, which is very harmful, to create that public awareness still. The reason I'm highlighting this so much, I think, in terms of the geopolitics of South Africa's thinking, as well as resources, is that these ships are, as I say, increasing in number. We've heard about the criticality of shipping for all countries, and in terms of sea routes, and indeed the ability to respond to accidents. We're looking at a future in which there is a great deal of uncertainty and increasing risk, which we are fortunate maybe to date, but we cannot take it for granted. As I say, you do have to turn received wisdom on its head, that this will be a situation which lasts where there isn't any more accidents. The reason there'll be more shipping as well, so just to highlight as well, those ships which have turned off their signals, we were able to see them sometimes through satellites, but there are many more spoofing their location or not bothering to have their AIS navigating through rather treacherous areas, I think a very big concern for us all. Another reason is that shipping is going to be the vehicle, as it has been throughout history, through which trade and growth, the reduction of inequality, the reduction of poverty, the increase in employment and economic growth is going to be because of trading either through ships with neighboring countries in a form of cabotage, which has been discussed in African Union circles, but also with overseas markets. South Africa in particular is rather remote from most of the world, but also obviously in terms of its major markets, which are China and Europe and the United States and India. It has to be carried by vessels. And these vessels, as they sail around the Cape, are likely to, as I say, encounter more severe storms, or we have to place a high priority on safety, which is why I wanted to demonstrate how challenging it is for South Africa to have such a large area of safety. The president of South Africa in the top right photo is inaugurating an initial shipment of African free trade, continental free trade agreement goods under those regulations. As I say, these are largely going to be carried still by ships. Ideally, there will be internal African markets. Oh. 2 minutes. Well, I see. One of the things I should have actually started to say as well, and perhaps this will stand in for a bit, I want to say is this is not the only opportunity to talk. I would welcome to engage with all of you on these matters. I'm sure there are many questions which you would like to ask me, and I would like to correspond with you. This is not the only chance because of the community being created. The Ever Given on the bottom left, the MS Innis in Durban Harbour in 2017, caused by a cyclone which caused the ships to lose its moorings and block the entrance of one of the most important ports, not just for South Africa, but for the entire region, Zimbabwe, Lesotho, Eswatini, goods which need to be traded in and out with overseas markets, blocked potentially, and for which there are sometimes very few alternatives. The need for port infrastructure is essential. I will, very briefly just go through this. The Coral Sol floating liquid natural gas vessel, which is currently anchored off Cabo Delgado in Mozambique. A tremendous source of wealth is believed to be lying beneath the oceans, which will be processed into liquid natural gas, which I think India is planning a very important part of its energy production to be liquid natural gas in the future. Markets such as this in Africa, but offshore is where a lot of this infrastructure is going to be either located or permanently located in many cases as well, raising the issue of maritime security. Who is securing it in what kind of facilities? Crisscrossing this is a well-known southern route of heroin and drug trafficking. Crisscrossing this area in which there are billions of dollars of investment and countries which have energy policies riding on gas imports and exports. It's crisscrossed by a very sophisticated clandestine network of shipping, which is used to smuggling and is indeed going through these areas all the time. The geopolitics, and I will wrap up here, the geopolitics of this is perhaps very well illustrated here by a series of photos from Pemba. The top one is the SAS Makanda. It was built in 1986. It is based on an Israeli design of a strike craft. South Africa operated them during the apartheid era and recommissioned them. It was deployed on many occasions on a counter-piracy mission. Pirates had at one stage in 2010 managed to spread south into the Mozambique Channel. The top right is the Drakensberg, a South African ship built in 1987. The bottom are the the frigates which were purchased in the mid-2000s. South Africa has deployed almost all its fleet to Mozambique at one stage or another. It views it as its strategic area of interest, but it has not been able to deploy there anymore because the Navy has not been able to maintain vessels in a sufficient way. When the problems in Cabo Delgado of an insurgency and the death of thousands or hundreds and the displacement of thousands of people happened, South Africa unfortunately was not on standby in an area it sees as its geopolitical backyard in a sense. The vessels on the bottom right are Rwandan lake vessels which were taken from Lake Kivu and brought to Mozambique when Rwanda was invited to send a force to help defeat the insurgency a few years ago. The geopolitics of land-linked countries on ocean areas as well, and the significance or the perception of presence is changing in a big way. Pemba, as you see here, I'm sure many of you have been deployed or have possibly gone to Pemba, and there are at least $1 billion worth of naval equipment lying in this photo, which is effectively derelict. The reasons for which I could go into, but it is linked to corruption and unfortunately political decisions which were taken in the name of maritime security, which has in a sense corrupted it for many. So the idea of creating more maritime security with new vessels and new capabilities has become more challenging because of things like that. I think I will leave it there. Thank you very much for affording me the opportunity to speak to you all today. I look forward to future conversations with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Timothy Walker. May I now request Captain Sean Andrew from the Royal Australian Navy. He's currently serving at the National Security College of the Australian National University. Over to you.
Admiral Singh, Vice Admiral Chauhan, serving and retired officers, friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It looks like I've come off the bench for the first 15 to bring us home in a flurry, so I'll move quite quickly through my presentation. And who would have thought there's a white guy from Australia talking about Yemen and the Western Indian Ocean? But I do have a fair bit of experience in the Middle East. But to try and provide a sufficient answer to this question, it's important to frame the question, and I'll do so by looking briefly now at the history of Yemen, the influence upon the state, the regional environment, and indeed geopolitics and geography, and briefly at the drivers of conflict, resource conflict, and lastly, looking at Yemen itself, the impacts of the global operating system, and I've just managed to scramble some recommendations, so stand by. Look, the modern history of Yemen begins in after World War I, British protectorate, of course. From there in 1962, a coup, a civil war. The kingdom became an Arab republic representing North Yemen. To the south, the area administrated by the British became the Aden Protectorate, and then it became its own state, the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen. But then in 1990, the two states got together, the Yemen Arab Republic to the north, and of course the socialist state, the Republic of Yemen, to the south. And they, through unification, became the current Republic of Yemen. Fast forward 2010, the Arab Spring should be no surprise to people. It created the conditions for tension and breakdown. Moreover, the president from 1990, Ali Abdullah Salem, no one thought he would last a term, but in fact he lasted 30 years. He turned out to be a bit of an autocrat. He also turned out to be corrupt. And he also turned out that people didn't like him. So as protests took to the streets to challenge poverty, unemployment and corruption. This was despite Yemen possessing substantial natural resources, oil, fish, gas, cobalt, nickel, zinc, and minerals such as limestone and gypsum. With the civil unrest as a nation born out of civil war, with the overthrow of the Salem regime, Mr. Hadi came in, and in 2014, Yemen fell again into civil war with the Houthis taking the capital of Sana'a. Now, that was predicated upon a dispute about fuel excise, domestic policy. In 2015, a Saudi-led coalition, the Emiratis, Sudan, Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, Senegal, came in to try and stabilise the place. Today, there are some 6 factions and alliances and pseudo-alliances, and some of these are declared and some of these are not declared. Government of Yemen, the Houthis, of course, Southern Transitional Council, National Resistance Forces, the Ansar al-Sharia and the Al-Qaeda, and there's also elements of Islamic State. And those who know that history is about Islamic split into about 10 factions. It should be noted that the international and regional sanctions against Yemen have really probably done more harm than good. It basically prohibited food, medicine, essentials of life have not got through. Funnily enough, weapons have, and those weapon systems are predominantly from Iran. Now, the Yemen war is often seen, and I would argue it's a contested theory, as a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, with Saudi Arabia being mostly Sunni and Iran being Shia, respectively fought through the proxies of the Saudi-led coalition and the Houthis. By all accounts, the Houthis appear to be slowly succeeding in their efforts in Yemen, and in fact, there has been there has been a slowdown in fighting with all states looking for political options, which has rather become a war of attrition. Look, the UN brokered ceasefire elapsed in October 22. Both sides have refrained from major escalatory actions. Hostility levels remain low. Chinese brokered talks in April 23. No meaningful outcome. Since August 23, sporadic fighting has remained, and these are Al-Qaeda and Arabia Peninsula groups against the Southern Transitional Council, and that's the Emirati-sponsored folk, or supported, I should say, supported folk. Now, on 10 October 2024, Yemeni's Houthi leader, Abd al-Malek al-Houthi, warned that if the United States intervenes in the Hamas-Israel war directly, that they'll respond with military action. Politically, this provides the Houthis with some sense of increased legitimacy in the Muslim world, with the active role they've played in targeting Israel and the Red Sea attacks. I should probably use my PowerPoint. I apologise. I don't normally do PowerPoint, but as a request of the good Admiral, I did. I think it's a slide 2. Right. Look, the Middle East is an arcle. There's no disputing that. Since the mid-20th century, there are multiple conflicts among disparate rivals, domestic disputes, regional competition, spillover, drawing in major powers. By 2024, 10 conflicts have happened across the region. The Israelis are of 2 fronts, although I heard a radio report saying President Netanyahu talks about a 7-front war. The Houthis have had three wars. There's an extra regional one with Saudi, an internal one, and of course the Red Sea. But the tensions have always persisted between Israel and the wider Arab world. Iraq, Syria. I can tell you that the Iranian-backed militias do attack coalition and US forces with alacrity, UAVs, ballistic missiles, and that's pretty much continued since 22. You just don't hear about it. As I said, Yemen's involved in 3 wars: civil war, regional confrontation, and of course now fundamentally what I would call a very rudimentary sea denial mission, Red Sea, the southern reaches. I think it's important to note that the Houthi slogan since 2003 is "God is the greatest, death to America, death to Israel, a curse upon the Jews, victory to Islam." Bear in mind, ideology is going to be important here. Right, maritime issues. I'll wrap up with some of the metrics at the end. But look, with assessed Iranian support, the Houthis have expanded their offensive strategy and increased their level of aggression since the conflict in Gaza broke out. The action poses a significant threat to global shipping, which in turn poses a threat to the global operating system. Why? Well, 12% of the global trade passes through the Suez Canal, 30% of all global container traffic, over $1 trillion worth of goods per annum. There was more than 22,000 ships utilised the route. That's 50 ships per day, carrying between $3 and $9 billion worth of cargo. According to Egypt's Suez Canal Authority, the waterway carried over 1 billion tonnes of cargo in 2019, representing 4 tonnes the tonnage transiting Panama Canal at the same period. Also, there's a drought in Panama, might add. Look, the results on the tacking have impacted global trade. Shipping costs are up 300%. I'd also note they are starting to dip, but I'll get to that at the end. This will likely have a negative impact on economical implications on the final prices of goods transported worldwide. Additionally, and north to this capacity point, Egypt's Suez Canal revenues are down 40%. So this is where we start to think in a cumulative manner. If you're a complex planner, you'll see where I'm going with this. Think about all the issues, thus providing Egypt with an unprecedented economic challenge, given the Suez Canal is their main source of currency and Egypt's economy. There's their maritime attack. Houthis are armed with capabilities. It's reported they have different classes of anti-ballistic missiles, the Fatah 313 and the Ride 500. Anyone who does surface warfare in here knows that if the range is said to be 500, I don't think any tactical range has ever got over 25 miles. But it remains a threat. And I did see in the last few days they've got surface UAVs attacking a Panama flagged ship. Right, to revisit the question, resource geopolitics in West Asia as a driver of the Yemen crisis. Yemen is located at the southern end of the Arabian Peninsula in West Asia. It occupies over 203 square miles. It's the largest Arab country, a coastline that stretches 1,200 miles. Its shores are washed by the Red Sea, the Gulf of Eden, and the Arabian Sea. It's got separate climates, and in the space of time I'm going to move past that. It does have resources, although oil is declining. But but it does have some of the most fertile land in the Arabian Peninsula, which accounts just for over 2%, but employs over 50% of the population, which contributes 20% of the GDP. Petroleum used to contribute up to 70% of government revenue, the mining 7% of GDP. Political instability has really knocked this around since 2011. You wouldn't be surprised. There is an AusAid report, a US aid report, which talks about the Yemeni fishing industry, which was really productive. 15% of their GDP came from that. In the last recent years, it's nosedived down 12%, and they pull in probably 50,000 tonnes, and that would be from subsistence fishing. So there's opportunity. Like, let's try and join the dots, and it's important to consider that drives resource-based conflict. Conflicts over natural resources arise when all parties, internally, externally, disagree about ownership, allocation, management, use, and protection of natural resources and related ecosystems. Move on. Driver one is competition over increasing scarce renewable resources, demand-induced scarcity, supply-induced scarcity, structural scarcity. Driver two is poor governance of renewable natural resources of the environment, and that's policies, institutions and processes that don't work. Driver three is transboundary natural resource dynamics and pressures, and that's was a great example in Somalia. So, coming to my last slide. Nope. Yemen, ancient roots or modern grievances, casual links and conflict. Look, there is a view from academic experts. I called upon Helen Lackner and Iona Craig that the war in Yemen is a modern grievance and not based on historical claim. It's evidenced by the drivers to disruption, conflict over fuel subsidies. The government wished to cease this expensive payout. The Houthis used the subsidies as a political touchpoint to challenge the government. Additionally, military division coupled with Houthi takeover combined with Saudi intervention, and lastly, shifting a pragmatic opportunistic domestic policy. Cultural antipathies are not resolved easily. Are the Houthis an Iranian proxy? First and foremost, there's Zaidi Shiites, and Shia Muslims are the minority community in the Islamic world. The Zaidis are a minority of Shia, significantly different in belief, doctrine and beliefs from Shias who dominate in Iran, which are the Twelvers. And in fact, some clerics and scholars think that al-Houthis' version of Islam is way out of kilter from a technical and theological point of view, which is an interesting piece. Additionally, calling them a proxy of Iran would be to think there's a degree of control exists. I put to you that there is now evidence that the Houthis are obtaining weapon systems and weapon parts from eastern states in the Indo-Pacific. Anyway, moreover, so we've done that. With best endeavour, I offer a few thoughts and analysis. Economically, the Houthis may want to expand their war in Yemen. They'll need to control Marib or Shabwa. That's where the oil and gas fields are. That needs to fund the program. Foreign policy is problematic. The Houthis dislike the United States and Israel. Their charter is quite explicit. Domestic policy with religious characteristics. The current leader, Abdul Malik al-Houthi, took over as Houthi leader from his brother, who was assassinated in 2004. He's something of an enigma. His speeches are pre-recorded. He constantly moves for the fear of assassination. Current assessment that al-Houthis' ultimate mission for the Houthis is to revive the legacies of his ancestors by installing a Zaidi emanate. In other words, he wants a theocracy, a Shia theocracy, to run Yemen. Because what he wants to do is get rid of the Sunni Salafah. So this is quite interesting. Friend from Cambridge, Elizabeth Kendall, advised the UK Foreign Affairs Committee that al-Houthi speaks as though he is the word of God. Al-Houthi strongly opposes foreign influence in the Yemen's government. Lastly, al-Houthi believes in the cause of the Palestine. His ultimate goal is to defeat Americans, military presence and political influence in the wider Middle East region. Finally, I conclude that resource geopolitics in West Asia is not a driver of the Yemen crisis. Internally, the very modern grievances are the sustained driver of this crisis. But Yemen is a fragmented society. It is impoverished. It has a collapsed economy. It is a broken country. Yemen has a generation lost to war, poverty, no education, health support, limited international support. I like to recall earlier Chauhan that the highs of foreign policy are infused by the lows of domestic politics. Yet what does this mean? So I offer globally today, very few are capable of drawing a golden thread through issues of maritime character. The literature review of any reputable global trends reports just really gesture to maritime stuff. But here's some ideas to think about. Container prices have come back, potential front loading of low value containers, arguably garden furniture. Ports and facilities are starting to see significant congestion. This leads to ship cramping and port limits. Deep supply chains are becoming affected. Who has an Apple Watch in the room or a smartwatch? Smartphone? Okay, of that phone, you've got 29 components. Of those 29 components, they come by sea. One of those components falls over. You don't have an Apple phone. This morning at breakfast, there's Nutella. Nutella is goods come from 11 countries. It's manufactured in 10 countries. It's transported to 73 countries. You know, you're going to start to see little things disappear when pressed. But when I talk about deep supply chains, think of a capacitor that goes into think of a capacitor that goes into a gadget, that goes into a widget, medical supplies. All these things are quite complex. I can't tell you when the pinch point will be, but I do know it's coming. But the other part is what we've probably missed is the price of living hasn't really been that invasive. And the reason being that most people don't realise that the shippers during COVID made a bundle. And so they enhanced capacity, hence why we've not really seen it. Plus, there's about 25% more ships on the books globally. I'd like to see how it unpacks, because anyone who knows how the merchant trade system works, it's rather fragile. So it's all about time and space. This tells me that oceans literacy is something that needs to be taken seriously. After all, oceans are more than blue whales, naughty boats, and Baywatch. Recommendations. I'll finish up in 30 seconds. I will speak plainly. My first recommendation, and you're talking about the maritime domain, is to speak plainly. Long, meaningless, pseudo-intellectual statements are unpalatable. They don't deliver anything. Speak plainly. The other thing is the recommendation is to acknowledge, be aware of ethnocentricity, and also understand your maritime operating environment. The Indian Ocean region has 1,500 years of heterogeneous polity. It's resilient. So not every problem is a nail and not every solution is a hammer. It's resilient. And I know resilience, we can argue about that, resilience from what to what, but the Indian Ocean has demonstrated 1,500 years, it can bounce back. But stop rehashing old policy. It's like every time a government comes in, they have some general who knows nothing about the sea and they dust off 4 policy ideas, which are ship visits, staff exchanges, senior officer visits, and then a really noddy PASEX. And that apparently is the policy brilliance of any one state. I think bigger, strategic imagination. I know I've seen it start to evolve between Australia and India. I'm not just saying that, but Malabar the other year was quite an exception to the rule. That's a good thing. Right, the other word, don't use the word comprehensive. I fundamentally think it's an alibi for lazy thinking and really bad policy ideation. If you've got something, write it out. Don't use the word comprehensive. And I leave you with a thought by one of my heroes. He was the Attorney General in Australia, and about 101 years ago, when the Navy and the Nation speech was given to the Australian government by a friend of Corbett, Sir George Sydenham Clark, he spoke to Australia needing a Navy, and he spoke about the cyclic wave of how Britain nearly destroyed itself by not funding or understanding the value of a fleet as opposed to the cost. So John Madden got up and he said, look, thanks very much. You won't find it in the paper. You'd have to go on to Trove and look at the Argus newspaper. I think it's the 7th of June. He said, the problem that democracies have is they suffer from the vanity of democracy. What that means is governments will buy ships they don't ever expect to send to war. And when they buy those ships, they'll put them so far apart, they're of limited utility. And the last point is governments rarely speak to people with the prerequisite knowledge. So my point is, and it comes back to this thing about maritime security, to build on what Christian said, my hobby horse, which is ocean literacy, is we need to think bigger. Navy is just one part of the maritime solution, but there's an absolute opportunity to come together and actually not dust off old problems, but actually deliver new solutions. Thank you very much.
Much appreciated, Captain Chauhan. You're well ahead of time, and I wish if I could just pull some rabbit out of my hat and give you a bonus, but that's for some other occasion. May I now call upon Rear Admiral Professor Shaul Chorev, who's from the Israeli Navy, retired. He's currently the head of the Institute of Maritime Policy and Strategy, the Israel National Center of Blue Economy and Innovation at Haifa in Israel. I believe he's connecting virtually. So is he around? Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll take a few moments as Admiral Chorev joins us online.
Thank you very much. Can you see my presentation?
Not yet, sir, but we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Let me 1 minute and I'll arrange it. Can you see it now?
We can hear you, Admiral, but you're not able to see your presentation just as yet.
Let me try again.
Sure.
Now, can you see my presentation?
Not as of now, Admiral.
Sir, if you're comfortable, can we run your presentation from our end? I'll change the slides for you as you go on.
Okay, let's do it.
That's very helpful. Thank you. First of all, at the outset, Admiral, a very warm welcome to you. And thank you so much for taking time to be here amidst us on a virtual mode. Over to you, Admiral.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers and especially my friend Admiral Chauhan for the opportunity to participate. Unfortunately, after October the 1st and the missile attacks, the 200 missile attacks on Israel, all the airline canceled their flight, so we were not able to do it. So please, the first slide. Yes, when we are speaking about the Eastern Mediterranean, we can say that here we have the countries that are living in this area, and you can see which are the countries that are living here. Next slide, please. The topics that I would like to cover is the geostrategic patterns of the Eastern Mediterranean, recent changes in the geopolitical landscape, the development of maritime resources in the region, and key security events in the past, and then reflections on the future. Next slide, please. Speaking about the Eastern Mediterranean, I should mention that there are two choke points that are influencing this region. The first one is the Suez Canal, and you can see the elements that are going through the Suez Canal, or the numbers, 10 to 12% of the global trade, and also 30% of the containers. And primary risk is climate and accidents, as it was presented with the Ever Given situation or accident. Next slide, please. I think that you mentioned what are the consequences of the Houthis' activities, and you can see what is the distance that's saved by going the Suez Canal. Next slide, please. And what is the capacity of ships are going there and how it affects the situation. Next slide, please. The other choke point, or second choke point, is the Turkish Straits. That include the Dardanelles and the Bosphorus. And approximately about 48,000 ships are passing through the Turkish Straits each year. And main aspects are grain, food, fertilizers, as also with oil. Ukraine produced 50% of the world's sunflower oils, and Central Asian states, Uzbekistan, rely on the Bosphorus for oil exports via the Caspian Sea pipelines to Russian ports on the Black Sea. So the primary risk is geopolitics, and if we can go to the next slides, I think that the war between Ukraine and Russia presented to us what is such a risk. Next slide, please. Speaking about who is affected by this or where food imports are affected by the Ukraine crisis, we can see that most of the states in Central Asia and also in Northern Africa, especially Egypt and Sudan, are got the results of such the Ukraine crisis. Next slide, please. Those are the numbers that you can see here, come down to the who is affected, how he is affected by this crisis, and you can see that such crisis was overcome not only by the pressure that put on Russia and Turkey, but also by some kind of arrangement that Ukraine did with other states, adjacent states, to do it by land. Next slide, please. Speaking about the Eastern Mediterranean significant event. So the location, primary complex, civil war, interstate conflicts, I think that it dictates the situation. It's a prime arena for geopolitical and ideological competition. The region marked by a political and security vacuum since the US retrenchment from the Middle East, pivot to Asia, or rebalancing. The Russia-Ukraine war, I elaborated about it, and migration flows. Due to the Syrian civil war, about 5 million people immigrate from Syria, part of them through the Mediterranean, and also in North Africa, people are immigrating to Europe, Italy, and other places, which is also a phenomenon that affects the security. And Chinese investment in infrastructure through the Belt and Road Initiative. And the region saw emergence of two significant revisionist global middle powers, that's Turkey and Iran. Next slide, please. Eastern Mediterranean significant event, I think that we can say Russia Middle East resurgence in 2015, trying to help President Assad, Abraham Accord between Israel and the Emirate countries, Russia-Ukraine war in February 2022, and Israel-Hamas war, continuing war. Now it's a 7-front war. Next slide, please. Speaking about the great power competition in the region, I think that the picture shows you what is the situation now. It's geopolitical aspects that influence all the region, and the US with the status quo countries trying to sustain the situation against the revisionist states, namely Russia, China, Iran, and other things. Next slide, please. The US, after Trump administration, President Biden reasons to deprioritize in the Middle East is mentioned here. China's challenge, energy independence, Cold War containment policy, exhausted from its deep involvement in the region, Afghanistan and all other places, and frustrating for the Arab Spring. Next slide, please. If you look and see what is the 5 principles of the US in this region, you can see them, the rules-based international order to support state, not allow foreign or regional powers to jeopardize freedom of navigation through the Middle East waterways, namely Strait of Bab el-Mandeb and other places. Next slide, please. work to reduce tension, de-escalation, and conflict whenever it's goes through the diplomacy. And you can see it by the Biden declaration of don't naval diplomacy, sending aircraft carrier group to the region, and building political, economic, and security connections between among US partners, including through integrated air and maritime defense structure. And as usual, trying to support human rights. Next slide, please. With Russia, I think that there is no need to mention Russia research into the region, using it through the civil war in Syria, using Syria port as a port of warm water to the Russian Navy, and trying to consolidate its interest in this region. Next slide, please. Turkey. I think that Turkey is should be taken very carefully in the region. They have an assertive posture, dominates the geopolitical in the region. And due to its geographic size, military power, and aggressive policy, Turkey has been able to shape its immediate environment by projecting power into Syria and Libya. Turkey has asserted sovereignty of territorial waters and shifted towards the concept of free sea. Turkey doesn't recognize Cyprus' maritime borders and trying to challenge it through various activities. And its economic crisis strain relation with NATO allies and Eastern Mediterranean countries, prevent it from assuming leadership role in the region. Next slide, please. Turkey's strategic reorientation, and I think that you can see that they are trying to do it not only in the Mediterranean. Lastly, Turkey plans to deploy frigates to protect the Rook Rice energy exploration in the Somalia EEZ. So Turkey expand its ambitions and not limiting it to the Mediterranean. Next slide, please. The elimination of maritime border in the Eastern Mediterranean is a big issue, especially for Turkey. And you can see, next slide, please, how it's demonstrated. The prospect of discovering new energy is influencing all it, because in the Eastern Mediterranean, a lot of hydrocarbon reserves are located there, and Turkey is very eager to try and to have an access to such reservoir. So Cyprus, Greece, and next slide, please. And also some political, and Mavi Vatan, the new policy of Turkey, which is declaring the performance and the priority, the maritime domain, to their security. Next slide, please. So they try to have a venue to other countries in order to extend their territorial waters. Here, some kind of agreement, arrangement with Libya to extend them the EEZ, ignoring Crete and Rhodes in Greece, and taking part of the Libyan collaboration. Next slide, please. With Israel, prior to the war, I think that we have achieved a success in the elimination of the border between us and Lebanon, mediated by the US, and it's also deal with some hydrocarbon reserve in the region, and I'm very happy that till now this agreement was not challenged by Hezbollah, and it's quiet in the area. Next slide, please. Here you can see the reservoir of hydrocarbon in this region. And I would like to pay your attention to phenomena that is not spoken so much, that from our Leviathan hydrocarbon reservoirs with a pipeline to Egypt. Israeli gas is going to Jordan and even to Syria. So next slide, please. We succeeded, and these are the potential of the gas in the region, and you can see that there is a big potential for the countries in the region to explore and to have this gas reservoir. Next slide, please. And this is the estimated gas. Next slide, please. We are very proud that unless all this war that we have in the region, we were successful to establish the East Mediterranean Gas Forum with all the participants, including the Palestinian Authority. And it's give some kind of prospect to this reason. Next slide, please. Speaking about the climate crisis, the Middle East can offer renewable energy potential due to the location of the region. We have a lot of sun, we have a lot of deserts that can give us the advantage of producing renewable energy from the sun in the region and also to export it to Europe. Next slide, please. So if you are looking about the future, what is the potential? How we can achieve some kind of prosperity from this region, which is only involved in wars and all such things. We are speaking about an export of green hydrogen as also solar energy from this region to Europe. Next slide, please. Coming to the IMAC, Indian Maritime Economic Corridor. In the picture, you can see during the summit of 2023, Biden and Modi and the Arab leader shaking hands in declaring about this corridor. I think that due to the crisis in the Suez Canal and the Red Sea, we should explore alternative pathway, and one of them is the IMEC. And from Israel, we have also our point of view, because next slide, please. You can see that the western point is ended up in Haifa port. So another step, next slide, please. Indian entrepreneur, Mr. Adani and his group, they completed the purchase of Israel Haifa port. So from India to Haifa to Israel, there is a continuity, and we have to improve this corridor as an alternative to the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. Next slide, please. I think that the Emerald they have started to deal with all this issue. Next slide. And it's also complement when we are speaking about the Abraham Accord, how we can improve the connectivity and the peace relation with the moderate states in this region. Next slide, please. Now I'm coming to my concluding remark. First, the Eastern Mediterranean, what has endured thousands of years of strategic of the great power, is still becoming an issue here. The region retains it today commanding interest not only from local and regional actors, but also from global players, US, China, India, Iran, Turkey. As Iran works to extend its reach to the Mediterranean, Russia, as it has for centuries strived to extend its influence across the Mediterranean. The US is signaling desire to reduce its involvement in the region. China has become a significant player in the Middle East, driven by commercial and strategic interests. The region has seen conflicts due to the concerns over energy security and claims of energy reserves. Next slide, please. What does the de-escalation between Greece and Turkey, and some question that I would like to raise, what does the de-escalation between Greece and Turkey mean to the resolution of the Eastern Mediterranean crisis? How will the Gaza war affect the nature of relations between Turkey and Israel in the Eastern Mediterranean? This relation deteriorated in the last few months. What are the likely scenarios for relations between Turkey and Cairo based on Eastern Mediterranean Energy Forum? Next one is, how does the swords of iron war affect regional energy and security cooperation between the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum states, Greece, and the region? I show the potential not only for the Middle East, but for Europe, and I hope that when the war will end, this potential will be utilized. How did the war and the de-escalation between Greece and Turkey affect the interaction between Turkey and the EU in the region? And the last slide. And what is the potential challenges for Israel? I think that its opportunity is threat and challenges. First, we have to maintain open sea lines of communication, what is currently not done in the Red Sea. The second is developing the concept of Eastern Mediterranean as being within Israel's strategic depths. Securing the sea line, the lines of communication in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. Along with the risk, there are also many opportunities of which Israel should take advantage to improve its maritime security. Some of the challenges can be met by national actions, but many others will require international collaboration with like-minded nations in the region as well as in the world. Last but not least, I think that the India Maritime Economic Corridor should be a very good challenge and opportunity for the region, for India, and for Europe. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rear Admiral Shaul Chorev. We much appreciate your presence, even if it is virtual. May I urge you to kindly stay online for the next 40-odd minutes, because then we are segueing into the question-answer session. So please bear with us until then. Thank you.
Yes.
May I now invite Dr. M.S. Tumeni S. Gurumo, Senior Lecturer, Department of Maritime Transport in Dar es Salaam Maritime Institute in Tanzania. She will be addressing us on offshore natural gas as a driver for Tanzania's geopolitics. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. My distinguished audience, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I thank the Almighty God for giving us all opportunity to be here this morning. And I also appreciate the organizers of this particular conference for inviting me. I'm honored to be here to share my presentation and opinions regarding offshore natural gas in Tanzania, especially as a driver for Tanzania's geopolitics. In my presentation, I will look at those aspects, as you see. And I will start with taking you all to the United Republic of Tanzania. Away from this room in New Delhi, let's go to Tanzania, the United Republic of Tanzania. This is a state, sovereign state located in Eastern Africa, that is west of Indian Ocean. And it is a union of two formerly independent states, that is Tanganyika and Zanzibar. So there are people who know Zanzibar, but they don't know if Zanzibar is Tanzania. So Tanzania is Tanganyika and Zanzibar now. We do not have Tanganyika, but we have the United Republic of Tanzania. The area, as you can see, 947,000 square kilometers. The population right now is around 63 to 66 by 2023-24. GDP is growing steadily. It is 5.1% in 2023. About foreign trade, key trade partners includes India, China, Japan, Singapore, South Africa, and others, without forgetting Kenya, our very neighboring state. Principal exports include minerals, including gold, diamond, tanzanite, and coal. Agricultural products mainly transported or exported include coffee, cotton, cashew nuts, tea, sisal, and cloves. Now, coming down to natural blue economy resources, I would say the first and foremost is the waters. So we have about 1,424 kilometers coastline that is along the Indian Ocean, and from north border with Republic of Kenya down to the south border with Mozambique. That is how it lies. We have a territorial water of about 64,000 square kilometers, but also exclusive economic zone within the Indian Ocean, 23,000 kilometer squares. We have inland waters of 61,500 square kilometers, and that includes Lake Victoria, the famous Lake Victoria, most of you would know, the Tanganyika, Lake Tanganyika and Lake Nyasa and others, including other rivers as well. Now, the fish species accounts for over 50 species, but coming down to the specific issue here is the proven natural gas reserves so far is 57.54 trillion cubic feet. That brings me to natural gas developments in the country. Natural gas explorations and major discoveries started 50 years ago. In 1974, there at within the Indian Ocean at Songosongo Islands in Tanzania, that was the first discovery of natural gas. And others came later. But only 30 years later, that is 2004, is when this gas was commercially exploited for domestic electricity generation and industrial energy use. Discoveries and production of natural gas in the country has been on the rise as of 2010, attracting both national and international participation. All this together makes Tanzania a natural gas hub and place natural gas as a potential to Tanzanian economic growth and prosperity. So, what is there? I was looking at the legal and the institutional framework as a major concern to start with. Is there sufficient legal and institutional framework for management of natural gas production and trading? The laws and policy. I could not find specific, so to speak, law or policy regarding natural gas, but through the National Energy Policy that was enacted in 2015, some elements of guidance for natural gas were included. Also, the Petroleum Act was enacted in 2015. That one has specific regulations on natural gas. We have National Environmental Policy that was enacted in 2021 that provides guidelines for environmental concerns in as far as natural gas activities are concerned. Also in the Environmental Management Act that was enacted in 2004, it has some guidelines, especially on what is to be done before a person or a company is given a chance to explore natural gas at sea. We have a number of institutions, but before coming to institutions, I realized that there is Natural Gas Utilization Master Plan that was enacted in 2016. And this is from a plan from 2016 to 2045. And that is a particular thing that has specifically dealt with natural gas as a master plan. We have institutions. First and foremost, I will look at Ministry of Energy and Minerals because natural gas falls under this particular ministry. We have Energy and Water Utilities Regulatory Authority, and that was formed in 2006. The main duty is to regulate midstream and downstream activities, including processing, transportation, storage, distribution, and the like. But also we have the Petroleum Upstream Regulatory Authority that was formed in 2015. The main duty is to regulate and monitor the management and operations of natural gas discoveries, exploration, and production, including LNG project. There is an LNG project because right now the country is looking at the possibility of exporting LNG. Geopolitical aspects of natural gas discoveries. I derived this from the point that at the time, this time, when the world is in a quest for decarbonization, and Tanzania is potentially the leading producer of natural gas in East Africa, among others. Now, I look at the ongoing demand for electricity in Africa and the need to replace wood and charcoal as fuel in households. That makes Tanzania a center of attraction from other African countries to start with. But also, I look at this local interest for use of natural gas in both households and industry. There is a growing appetite on that. So that is another concern to look at. I look at Tanzania standing to become a significant player in the quest for decarbonization of the world. Now, we have countries that are major users so far of natural gas. We have countries that we have been trading with for a long time. And now we look at India, we look at China, we look at South Korea, but also UAE is interested. The EU, USA, the UK, Singapore, among others, those are important stakeholders that I see in the journey for discoveries and developments of natural gas in Tanzania. Active international engagements in economic diplomacy. In the country right now, we are looking at economic diplomacy. Although that we, as a country, we are non-aligned. Our foreign policy is non-alignment. So we are trading, we are dealing with every other country. We are looking at the prospects and the benefits and what we can offer and what we can gain. But now we are looking specifically also on economic diplomacy. And talking about economic diplomacy, among other pillars, it promotes economic cooperation, but also support peace and development. So those are the areas that I would think that the country would look at as we are journeying for oil and gas, natural gas developments and the geopolitics of it. What does all this mean? There is elevated need for technological infrastructure and innovation in the country. We cannot do it alone. We need international stakeholders to chip in to see something there. But also we need capacity building, especially human resource. It has taken all these 50 years, 30 years to come to where we are today. Why? Because as a country, we were looking at the ways to at least to develop capacity, internal capacity, before you open up the doors. Now, to date, we haven't reached where we are supposed to reach, I believe. So there is still a need for capacity building in this particular area. There are open doors for partnerships. There are many things that are needed: technology, infrastructure, innovation, all that needs a kind of partnership between Tanzania and other interested parties to work on together. Potential need for new trade partners as well. Strengthen foreign policy and security. This is another important thing that I would see that it needs to be looked upon. We need to strengthen foreign policy. We need to strengthen the security aspect of it. In conclusion, certainly the discoveries and ultimate production of natural gas have implications in Tanzania's geopolitics. Now, whether positive or negative, there are a number of things that I think as a country or any other country that has these resources has to look at. Tanzania needs to adequately reposit itself to cope with these developments. Once there are such developments, there are many other new partners would chip in. There are many aspects of international relations that will come in. Now, as a country, there's a need to reposition itself in order to cope and stay peaceful as it is. Politics, environment, and security policies need to be properly realigned in order to adequately cope. It makes a great sense that as a starting point, natural gas discoveries and developments in Tanzania is being wisely geared to the liberation of local communities from the domestic use of charcoal and firewood. This is for personal and individual health as much as for conservation of nature. But also it pleases to see that Madam President of the United Republic of Tanzania, Dr. Samia Suluhu Hassan, at the helm of this noble endeavor. She has been really encouraging. When we talk about cooking back in Tanzania, we talk about women. That is the duty mostly. So is really encouraging families to switch from use of charcoal and firewood and supporting such endeavors so that we utilize that natural gas from within before we move to the outside of the country. Now, finally, I would like to say that let me hope that and pray that continuing discoveries and envisaged developments shall remain exemplary legacy of enhanced peaceful existence of the Indo-Pacific region. Because we are all part of this, the Indian Ocean, we should work together to ensure that we move in a peaceful manner. As a food for thought, let's all be gentle on each other. There's no country that can stand on its own. self-sufficient, so to speak, in all aspects. So in all these, the resources are divided or are put in different places, I believe, for a good reason. So that it should be a reason to keep us together rather than making us fight each other and getting to hurting each other. Thank you very much. Asante sana.
Gracias, Dr. Gurumo. I much appreciate you winding up ahead of schedule. May I now finally call upon Dr. Hassan Kananje, who is the director of the Horn International Institute for Strategic Studies at Nairobi in Kenya. He will be addressing us on maritime resource geopolitics off the coast of Eastern Africa and the case for Kenyan leadership. Over to you, Dr. Kananje.
Namaste. Where I come from, it is rude to be greeted and not respond. Namaste. In Swahili, we say jambo. Thank you very much. At least the youngsters up there who watch Lion King, they know a few more Swahili words. Moderator, with your permission, I would like to expropriate a minute or two that were donated by my colleagues. That gives me about 24 minutes. I'm going to enjoy the luxury, with your permission.
Feel entirely free.
Thank you. But it's also important because being the last person to speak is never easy. And I asked extra minutes so I can make some comments as the last person to speak before I start my presentation. Now, when you're the last person to speak on the final day, sometimes you're either speaking to a room half empty or a room half asleep or both. And that can be very disappointing sometimes, even though when it's half empty, it may reduce some pressure and reduce some nerves that sometimes you get once you're on stage. But also for students up there, I'm really inspired by your presence, that you've stayed and you haven't walked away because you're the future. You're not just the leaders of tomorrow, you're actually the leaders of today, considering what is happening. In Kenya, we call Gen Zs. For those who watch TV, you saw what happened recently when they occupied parliament and forced the government to drop a finance bill that was unpopular. Now, I would like to extend my appreciation to the NMF and Vice Admiral Chauhan for extending an invitation to bring us here. Last year was the first year I came to Delhi, but I was at the Institute for Defense Analysis, and this is the second time I'm visiting the country. But what was forgotten, perhaps, is we are 3 Africans on stage and an Australian. Yes, some of you may be wondering, what was that white boy doing on stage talking about South Africa? No, he is an African. In every sense of the word, as it can get. If any of you are to come to Nairobi, chances are you're going to find people who look just like you and who probably speak your language and eat your food. It's a very diverse continent. But having said that, Admiral, I would kindly request that next time you don't put Africa the last. It's never a good feeling, especially because unconsciously we have biases as human beings that the last item on the agenda tends to be the least important. And I watched with concern as a number of delegates started walking away. It reminded me of sometimes what happens in the United Nations. I was like, what is happening? Is it because of the last session? Now, as Africans, we tend to be a little bit sensitive to that. Now, as Kenyans, we actually used to coming first. We went to America, we gave them Obama. And many of you might not know, but actually the father of Richard Sunak comes from my village. He's my village mate. Yes. And when we run in New Delhi Marathon, a lot of times we win some of them. So kindly, if you can put us in the middle, I think it's going to be better. Now, having made those comments, I want to talk about what brought me here today. But because much has been spoken, I'm not very good in using slides. And so I had to express it to Madam Chitali, who had worked so hard in facilitating us here, because she had requested that I may have to skip some of those slides, in part because many of you have already stolen my thunder, and therefore there's really nothing new. But I'll try at least to leave some impression. This slide contains information you already know with regard to the importance of the Indo-Pacific region and the significance of it in the, not just the history of the world, but in the new geopolitics, in determining who's going to shape the direction of the future. The reason why I'm having this map here is to show the part of Africa that actually falls under the Indo-Pacific and Indian Ocean, especially when talking about the east coast of Africa. And in this case, Eastern Africa at large. Now, East Africa has a long history of interaction with India, actually, going back many, many, many years. And this is kind of engagement that we expect is going to continue and expand, especially as the entire region, what we call the Greater Horn of Africa, becomes a new frontier for global geopolitics. So what are some of the regional players that is on the East African coast in the geopolitics of maritime? One, Kenya. As you may see, not only does it have or possess a variety of fish, but there's an estimation between 4 to 4.5 billion barrels of oil, offshore gas, that is yet to be exploited. Tanzania is by far, of course, the largest producer and potentially one of the largest producers on the continent of natural gas, estimated to be over 40 trillion cubic feet of gas reserves. Mozambique, commercially, is a valuable, it has valuable species of fish, but also rich in natural gas and oil. And I think, as we're going to see later, even some Indian companies are actually having some activity down there. Somalia, fish in high quantities, longest international maritime lanes, but it's also a country that lies along the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden theater. But increasingly, there's also estimation over the disputed borders with Kenya, the maritime borders, that there are probably trillions of dollars of natural gas underneath. Madagascar, as you can see, seabed with minerals, natural gas, and rare earth elements. Also a variety of fish. I think many of the youngsters remember Madagascar as a movie. It's actually a country. And you're welcome to visit one of these days. Seychelles is, fairly small country, but in terms of maritime is pretty valuable, with proven oil and gas deposits, as well as other minerals. Now, who are the immediate external players that having their foot into the affairs and the resources of East Africa? One, of course, the Chinese. China by far has emerged as perhaps the biggest, not just trading, but also investment partner and nation on the African continent. And I've had many questions with regard to the Chinese engagement. Of course, Chinese use the various companies, most of them are state-owned. Last week I was in Berlin. I interacted with the Foreign Ministry, the Council on Foreign Relations Committee with the Bundestag, think tanks in there, and many of them, the question was on mind is why China? And the answer I gave them is an answer I gave to a student of mine years ago when I was an associate professor at Wayne State University in Michigan. He asked me, why do you care so much about global affairs? And I responded to the 21-year-old young man, the reason because I care is because if you don't care, you won't be able to shape it. And so what I reminded my European friends is there was a sense on the continent that you did not care enough. And that is why today you're struggling to shape the events that are happening on the continent. A continent that has the size of population of India, but is 10 times the size of India, actually. That is significant. Two, you have the United Arab Emirates, and they use mostly the state-owned company called Moderator Petroleum, and significantly engaged in Somalia, as well as in other countries in the Horn of Africa. I'll leave the literature for you to read it, since you're all scholars. South Korea has been a new, but also reluctant entrant into this theater, currently engaged in Tanzanian maritime resource extraction. Tanzania and South Korea, engineering, construction signed an MOU to explore offshore oil and gas. And of course, this engagement, as you can see from the content here in PowerPoint, speaks for itself. India has made significant investments in natural gas, especially in Mozambique. And this engagement is actually continuing. In fact, on my way here, I met an Indian investor actually on the flight, and he told me he was coming from Mozambique. But he was still, like many, grappling and asking me about the future of the current conflicts in Cabo Delgado region and what that will mean with regard to sufficient exploitation of the resources in Mozambique. Turkey is perhaps the biggest soft power country in the Horn of Africa. And they're not just an imagined power with ambitions, as our colleague from Israel has mentioned. Just to give you an example, in 2000, Ankara had about 4 embassies in Africa. Today, they have about 46 embassies. In 20 few years, they've had such a massive expansion, but they're extremely deliberate and intentional. And so they've made significant investments, and they're increasing to explore, for instance, places like Somalia, being given rights to actually invest in not just hydrocarbons, but also other maritime resources. What are some of the challenges? So those are some of the opportunities. What are some of the challenges for maritime resource development? One is piracy. And I think some of you who've already spoken have alluded to the impact it had. In the 2000s, mid-2000s, I think the piracy, especially along this, coming from Somalia, caused a lot of trouble when it comes to navigation and commercial actions along that route. Increasingly, it has reduced, but to the extent that you're having, for instance, trouble in Yemen, you're having still fairly unstable Somalia, you have almost a complete implosion of Sudan. There's a likelihood that we may face dangers in the coming months and years. Mozambique, there is a conflict by a jihadist or an ISIS affiliate, sometimes popularly known as Al-Shabaab, but without no connection to the Somali Al-Shabaab, that has caused a lot of trouble and is actually affecting the potential not only of these countries, but also the companies and as well as external actors involved in sufficiently being able to make a difference. Another aspect is there is also reluctance because of the debt trap diplomacy, especially initially associated with the Chinese, but also increasing with other countries, that some of the engagements that these countries get into are trapping them in unsustainable debt, and that perhaps it may lead to some crisis in the near future. Of course, it's already happening on some smaller scale, but it's something that is now also building some kind of reluctance by countries to sufficiently move with building partnerships that can actually exploit the maritime resources. There's uncertainty, political instability in Somalia. There are concerns over environmental sustainability, countries such as Kenya. There's overfishing concerns that are coming in, especially by some, fishing companies from China. And it is something that I think, because there is no sufficient framework or operational framework to ensure there's mutual gain, but then to ensure there is actually a fairly productive engagement. It has militated against efforts to sufficiently, again, exploit the maritime resources that can make a difference in the economic development of those countries concerned. Maritime disputes has been another concern, especially between Kenya and Somalia. The ICJ ruled a few years ago that largely awarded Somalia much of its claims. It's a case that was not exactly settled because Kenya refused to recognize the ruling of the ICJ. And this is not just the only dispute. As more resources become apparent, there's likelihood to be a lot more disputes again across the coast of East Africa, which again is going to work against the ability of these countries to exploit those resources. Further challenges is lack of regional framework and weak national maritime policies for the countries in the coast of East Africa. The increased scramble for the Horn of Africa that has made the region a new theater for global geopolitics, with more than a dozen great and emerging powers having forward bases on military installations. If you look, they're actually spread around virtually all the big powers. Russia is now trying to get perhaps a naval facility, in Sudan, which is going to complete the equation of both the big as well as the emerging powers having a presence. The decline of the West, as we say, or relative decline of the West, and the rise of the rest, especially in the region, and the chaos of the New World Order, or what we call the New World Disorder, has challenged the normative rules-based international order, which has not really augured very well for the coast of East Africa, because you have new players who are coming with no rules at all, and it seems to be, free fall until everything for everybody else. Now, a critical aspect that I was to talk about also was a case for Kenya. Why should Kenya take leadership in the face of what is happening? Kenya boasts the largest economy in Eastern Africa, and compared, of course, to other players in the region, which are part of the Indo-Pacific. This hegemonic status becomes the foundation for Kenya's leadership role in the region. Besides, it has a relatively strong naval capacities with a demonstrably strong interest in blue economy and a continental leader on the climate agenda. This makes Kenya better placed in promoting maritime security. Nairobi also possesses a convening power, in part because of serving as headquarters for global environmental institutions such as United Nations Environmental Programme, as well as UN Habitat. Further, the designation of Kenya as a major non-NATO ally this year further places Kenya in a relatively better position to advance maritime security in the region due to potentially enhanced collaborative capacities that should come with this alliance. Further, Kenya's also economic status, relative stability, and geostrategic location along a key maritime trade route in the Indo-Pacific region has positioned her as an investment hub in the region and a key actor ally for many Western actors in the region, notably the EU and the United States. Kenya is therefore, by design of geography and the fortunes of geopolitics, is destined to take a leadership role, in the region. In conclusion, the maritime domain has become a new frontier for critical resources, offering both security, energy independence, and rare minerals that will shape the next chapter of technological development and hence geopolitical dominance. Coordination and collaboration in boosting capacities of critical stakeholders will be central in ensuring effective exploration and expropriation of these resources. As a key player in the Indo-Pacific, with natural links to the East African coast, a recognized leader in the Global South discourse, India's expansion of collaborative engagements in this domain, not only with key regional actors such as Kenya, but the wider subcontinent, will be a game changer in shaping maritime economy in India's natural spheres of influence. Further, the unpredictability of the New World Order, in part occasioned by shifts in the economic fortunes of the status quo, driven in part by competition for vital resources that are essential to industrial power demands, are more organized, deliberate, and investment and collaboration in the management of maritime resources is needed. This calls for a paradigm shift in geoeconomics thinking, not just here in New Delhi, but in other centers that seek to have a say in the future economy. As the United States, through Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Development, and China, through the Belt and Road Initiative, seeks to connect the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean across the East and Central Africa through the DRC, which of course accounts for instance, 73% of world cobalt production just last year. Does the MACN project, which the Indian project, go far enough in reshaping the maritime geopolitics in the Pacific? Will the IMEC, which one of the speakers alluded to a few days ago, provide a compromise answer? My friends, the world is an important inflection, rather it's an important geoeconomic inflection point. And whoever controls what lies within the maritime frontier will likely shape what lies outside it. As they say, well, geography is the mother of history. Geopolitics is a product of geoeconomics. And as I conclude with 1 minute remaining, part of the challenge that we have seen, especially when we are talking about not just the new frontiers of maritime, is almost unconscious lack of acknowledgement of theaters such as Africa, for instance, and what actually that means. I was asked a question by a member of parliament of Bundestag in Germany, in Berlin, last week. Why Africa? Because we're discussing about that. And she's told me that, well, because Africa is the future. You say, so you see, if you see Africa as the future, how come your investment is not following your vision? I think it's helpful to be less on talk and to be big in action. It may not be perfect, but as they say, we should never make the perfect the enemy of the good. We have to stand and to start somewhere. After all, we are all connected. And in the old African saying, I am because you are, and you are because we are. Thank you for listening.
Mercy, Dr. Hassan Kanenje. So we are more or less bang on schedule. Ladies and gentlemen, I think in my concluding remarks, I'll sort of allude to what I perceive to have distilled from amongst the various presentations, which I'll lay out before you. Before we open up the floor for a Q&A session, and hopefully it's very engaging, may I request all of you to please join me in applauding all the panelists here. Thank you, much appreciated. Now the floor is all yours for the next 20 odd minutes. So please shoot your questions, but may I urge you to please identify yourself and specify as to whom the question is addressed to. I see two hands rising up here. If you can just please bear with me before I think for now, please go ahead. To the lady first.
Good morning, everyone. Myself, Surat Gupta. I'm pursuing BA Honours in Political Science from Lady Shri Ram College. I have a question from Mr. Walker. How will South Korea work with emerging maritime power in Indian Ocean region, such as India and China, to enhance security and development of the African coast? And second question is, in context of African continental free trade area, what will be the geopolitics opportunities of South Africa to developing of maritime infrastructure and promoting trade?
Okay, before we request Dr. Walker to address that, could we have that gentleman please pose his question.
Good noon, everyone.
Good
Myself, Shubham Singh Charak. I am a research scholar in the Department of National Security, Central University of Jammu. I'm working on maritime security in the Western Indian Ocean region. So my question is, we have seen a decline.
Sorry, if I may just interrupt you, to whom is it addressed?
To Dr. Numani and Dr. Hassan, to both of them.
Right.
So as we have already seen, there is a decline in the maritime piracy and armed robbery in the Western Indian Ocean region, but it is on the rise. And one of the main factor which has reduced the piracy was the deployment of privately contracted armed security personnel in the region. So how the countries of Eastern African littoral see the deployment of PCESPs in the region? And the second question is how the countries of East African littorals see the Chinese base in the Djibouti as a threat or whatever in the region. Thank you.
So I think I can see another lady's hand raised there. If you can just take that, then I'll request for this set of answers.
Sir, we have questions from the balcony as well.
Sure, there are several hands popping up, which is fine. We'll take cognizance of that. May I request you to please go ahead?
Myself, Moitri Devi Borua from Assam. I did my master's from Center for Political Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University. My question is to Mr. Timothy Walker. So, during your talk, you very well mentioned about the various problems and issues being faced by South Africa. In this context, how is the foreign policy of South Africa taking shape given the relations with its immediate sovereign states along the coastline? Secondly, is there sufficient legal and institutional framework for management of the accidents that you mentioned, drug trafficking in the critical juncture of domestic politics? Thank you.
I think before we move on to the next set of questions, could we request for answers for now? Dr. Walker, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you for help asking me to dive a little deeper into some of the things which I could only really touch on a little bit in the presentation, and I'll try to cover as much as I can. So yeah, South Africa's relationship with countries like China and India in a naval sense are a huge priority going forward. Also, I'm sure many of you are aware that South Africa collaborates, and indeed right now is collaborating quite a lot with the Russian Navy as well. It does try to position itself as a friend to everybody, seeing its role as a guardian of the Cape Route, something which it's sort of ascribed into its doctrine since the 1950s. But it has not always had a clear alignment of its foreign policy with how its navy is operating. I think one of the kind of key assumptions in theory, or sea power theory and the law of the sea, is that navies are an instrument of a country's foreign policy. And in that regard, sometimes South Africa does send some very confusing signals to the rest of the world about who its partners are and what its priorities are. A bit like we heard yesterday in terms of the definition of security. If you try and define everything as security, then what actually is the priority security thing in that regard? And it's the same in a sense with South Africa. It's also challenged, and I'll try and link my answers here as well. It's challenged by the legacies of the past, the perception of South Africa as a hegemon, even a sub-imperial country within the region, is felt very strongly by its neighbors, and that is complicated in many respects by the lack of interoperability between naval platforms and indeed the training and doctrine of the various countries. Again, referring, I would say, to maybe what we can glean from academia on sea power and thinking around sea power, is that navies are among the least controversial sometimes means of collaborating between armed forces, especially maybe compared to armies where there's a lot more maybe suspicion. Navies as a global with a global capability and reach do seem to be able to interact with each other on a lot better basis. But that's not often playing out because in a sense, there are, as we saw from the presentation, several disputes, potential disputes over boundaries between African countries in West Africa, in the Mediterranean, as we've seen as well, and in Southern Africa. These aren't going to be disputed sometimes in the way which we see in the South China Sea of clashes between coast guards or navies. Foreign policy disputes over maritime matters which play out through navies actually play out in different domains. They play out in economics, they play out in diplomacy within between African countries as well. And that's something where we still haven't quite got maybe either the vision or the actual realization of the long-term benefits of interacting more, which is where the free trade agreement comes in as well. Absolutely essential role that South Africa will play as a gateway, but on the other hand, as a bottleneck, if its efficiency is not improved. Its port facilities have been left uninvested in for a long time. It has effectively sweated its assets for too long because there's been a long-term assumption that there will be a dependency of various countries, land-linked countries, as my colleague likes to say, land-linked countries dependent on South Africa's networks and infrastructure. But that's no longer the case because the free trade agreement is about intra-African trade, and many countries, Zambia with its copper, the DRC with its cobalt, as we've seen as well, and other countries who don't have a maritime border, their primary partners and trading partners are India or China or the European Union. They need to get their goods overseas, and the bottlenecks, unfortunately, created by congestion in South African ports needs to be addressed very quickly. I think that's a message which is slowly being woken up to, but I fear, if I put my South African hat on, it might be a little too late to retain what South Africa might otherwise have considered its comparative or strategic advantage in that regard. So to sum up very, very briefly, I would say that South Africa tries to be a collaborative actor with many at sea, but it does seem to favor actors within the IBSA, so India, Brazil, South Africa. There's an exercise next week, Russia and China, and that is sending signals which confuse a lot of people about what its maritime intentions are, because at the same time it operates German frigates, German built submarines, and has a doctrine which really dates back to the days of the Royal Navy as well. Thank you for the questions. I'm very happy to elaborate in the future as well and continue the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. May I request Dr. Kananje to address the specific question of the Chinese base in Djibouti, and then I'll pass it on to Dr. Gurumo for the poser on piracy, if you don't mind.
Thank you very much. I think from a policymaker perspective, they look at not just the Chinese base, but generally the number of bases that are in Djibouti from a very strategic, security standpoint. Now, the United States base seems to do the most, especially in supporting counterterrorism efforts. The Chinese are not exactly engaged in the region per se, except a few occasions of peacekeeping where they've also been limited. Now, the public generally, when it comes to external bases, it's to them it's like, okay, how do I choose to die? To be eaten by a hyena or to be eaten by a lion? It's like both of them, they're predators. They're going to kill me anyway, or they're going to eat me. So the public perception, it's never really friendly to foreign bases. But when it comes from a policy strategic level, you have a number of governments that have engaged, especially the United States and France. It has not so much been China. Now, on the Chinese aspect itself, a lot of Africans don't have a negative experience with China. And I think that also explains why China has been very successful when it comes to its making inroads within not just East Africa, but across the continent.
Thank you. About the issue of piracy at the coast of Somalia, there are a number of reasons that contributed to the decline in piracy in that area. It's not only the utilization of private security, because the private security use was even disputed between nations. So, among other things, the collaboration that was offered by the international community to provide security within the area. That is among the reasons that's why piracy was declined in that particular area. But also, we see that it might not be the end, because the source, we have to look at the source. Why piracy from the very beginning? Why did it start? There are, again, many other reasons that contributed to the uprising of piracy in that particular area, including, I can see geopolitics also plays part in that particular area. Wherever there are resources and there are external forces that wants to exploit those resources, and taking into consideration also that Somalia has never been stable, so to speak. So it's an area that is prone to, I can say it's prone to attacks by other states. Attacks not in a sense of war, but because they cannot stand, they do not have a say of their own. But also the living situation in Somalia is not very good. And one of the reasons being the country is not stable. So everybody wants to do everything in Somalia. And the influence, that is the influence of the external forces. So what I would say is, as a solution, we need to, again, I'm coming back again, we need to be gentle to each other. Yes, there are resources. Yes, you need resources from that particular place. Why don't you make a win-win situation rather than, being too selfish to yourself? So I think we need to come back to think like humanity should come first. And that is one among many ways that we could do away with all this piracy thing, especially at the coast of Somalia. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sort of tempted to add on, to permit me if I just to supplement what she said in regard to the situation of piracy, which got capped in around mid-2014, because I was there handling all of that on the civilian side. If I were to just identify, there were three singular factors. One is, of course, the creation of an international enabling mechanism in what is christened as CGPCS, Contact Group on Piracy of the Coast of Somalia, which emerged as a result of a Security Council resolution dating back to February 2009. This mechanism, which evolved, had 70 member states of the UN which were onboarded in this, and of course, several international organizations. So this coalition worked exceedingly well, and I think they were able to deliberate and come up with very, very tangible action roadmaps. The second was the shipping industry on its own set up the rules in terms of what is called as BMP, Best Management Practices, where they identified as to what are the security measures that they need to put on board vessels, starting from how they sight, then you put as many barriers as possible for the pirates board on, and then get into what is called as a citadel, etc. So all of this was on play, courtesy the BMP. So that again enabled this to, go a long way. And of course, with due deference to all the seniors from the Navy being here, there was a massive deployment of naval forces. I recall, I think at the peak, there were around 42 naval assets which were there in that region. And you had the CMF, the Combined Maritime Forces, the EU NAV4, and there were 6 independent deployers, including India, which played a pivotal role by positioning a frigate from October 2008 onwards. So that's, I think, just to add on to that. I see several hands, but I'm afraid I have a max of 10 minutes. Sir, if you please indulge me, can I just go to the top? There are students I'll certainly revert back to you, subject to time. Sure. Nice. Is there anyone out there, please? A max of 2 questions to the upper gallery.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Meher, and I am a student of Conflict, Peace, and Security Studies. So my question is directed to Dr. Hassan. So recently, certain private investments made in the port infrastructure evoked some strong reactions in the country, especially from the youth. As Kenya continues to expand its influence and seek more such investments, I just wish to know what can be the possible implications of such stances in the broader regional context. Thank you.
You want to say the top? We'll probably allow one more from that part.
Yes, sir.
Sorry, just looking at it.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kritika Tiwari. I'm currently pursuing my bachelor's in political science from University of Delhi. I have my question specifically to Dr. Hassan. India's Sagar initiative has aimed to enhance regional security and promote economic development across in the Indo-Pacific region. Given Kenya's strategic location along the East African coast and its growing maritime resource ambitions, how does Kenya view its partnership with India in terms of strengthening Indo-Pacific maritime security, and what specific areas of collaboration would you prioritize to ensure the protection of vital sea lanes and shared economic interests? Thank you.
Thank you. Before I go on, I'll just come back if you allow Dr. Hassan to please respond. You were, I think, craving for attention, so to speak, and here you go. You have 2 questions for now, so please go for it.
Thank you. Perhaps it's not so much craving for attention. Perhaps the students would like to come to a safari in Kenya. So, and you're highly welcome. Yeah, the first question, it had to do with, there was recent noise over an foreign investor, the Adani Group, I think it's someone's familiar, here in New Delhi. And the reason why, on the heels of the Gen Z protests in Kenya, there was information that the national airport was being sold, but it was not exactly what was being sold. Is because the manner in which what was done, it was not transparent. So the answer to that is transparency in these deals. The moment you have transparency, you're going to avoid lots of conspiracy theories, and especially in a country that is very politically active like Kenya. For those people who pay attention, we have one of the perhaps the most robust civil society, anywhere in the global south. It's extremely active. And so transparency in offering these tenders is going to be critical. How does Kenya view its relationship with India? One, India is a very, very important country to Kenya, not just for historical reasons, cultural reasons, yes, even Diwali is a big event in Kenya, so the connection is actually very natural. But the fact that it is Kenya's near abroad, and it has systems a lot more similar to our own conditions, but much of the last century that perhaps there's not been sufficient levels of engagement that should actually come naturally. But Kenya and India have always maintained close links. And I think with Kenya's renewed interest, especially in the blue economy and maritime affairs, efforts for both countries at building a framework that is going to ensure leadership in the Indo-Pacific, especially so far as the East African coast is concerned, I think is something that Nairobi is going to welcome, as well as countries in Central and East Africa that actually rely on ports of Nairobi for their transport and logistics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hassan. I see a couple of hands going up here. Please bear with me. I think we have a max of around 5 to 7 minutes ahead of us before we need to wrap up. So I'm afraid I may have to apply the guillotine and probably take just 2 questions. You could do a bilateral separately during the lunch recess.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Captain Eamon Kandika from Indian Navy, undergoing Naval High Command course at Naval War College of India. My question is to Mr. Timothy Walker. Africa possesses abundant reserves of rare earth materials and critical raw materials crucial for renewable energy technologies. Africa can play a key role in the global energy transition. But Africa is not able to extract maximum benefits as China, the largest trading partner, extracts the raw materials and does value addition by processing in China and dominates globally. So what are the reasons for this? And second question is, what other developed and developing countries should do in order to reduce the dominance of China in critical minerals by collaborating with Africa? Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone of you please take it? It's to Africa. Go for it, Doctor. Yeah. So, okay.
I was just jotting down some ideas just before I forget them, because as you're asking that, casting my mind back as far as I can really to think about the history of resource extraction in Africa. That is, in a sense, the story of colonial Africa. Even pre-colonial Africa is about the extraction to other parts of the world and the relationship of Africa as a kind of a peripheral part of that system has unfortunately been the story for too long, which is why, as Dr. Hassan was saying, the recognition or the place of Africa in the conversation is often overlooked or forgotten. Indeed, many of the location of the resources that we're discussing, that I discussed here as well with my photos, are located offshore, so within the exclusive economic zones, but nevertheless, the amount of capital, the kind of the skills required to operate the kind of extraction machines and processing machines are all going to be still primarily manufactured and located overseas. The issue of dependency is still quite strong, as you correctly noted. There are many onshore or inland extraction of areas, copper, as I say, in Zambia and the DRC, which are ongoing and require either huge labor or huge investments of capital in a way which would make them maybe less environmentally destructive, but at the same time would be quite maybe unequal in terms of how we've observed resource extraction elsewhere, where there is a kind of a closing off or enclosure of the area, and the often the linkage directly to ports of the resources which are extracted. It's very hard to actually say what would be the ideal way forward, especially because many of the kind of the hydrocarbons, the fossil fuels which are being located or are now being seen as perhaps more viable or feasible economically to extract are actually becoming less palatable, reputation-wise as well as obviously environmentally wise, to extract. The message coming across is perhaps that the importance of and I think this is some of the presentations we saw of looking at Africa as a source of solar power, of exporting of power is crucial, and those kind of conversations are slowly coming in, but they do have to come up against the sunk costs and the risk of those stranded assets. Mixing my metaphors, and I know a little bit, but of long-term investments and the kind of the power and either the ability to then shift offshore or to seek new sources. Sometimes it seems under the seabed is seen as a bit of a risk as well. I think maybe I'm not tackling. I apologize if I'm not tackling your question completely, but the processes involved, Africa is always collectively, I think, struggling to either raise the confidence or raise the capital, or to have the confidence of overseas markets to invest, often in a way which is healthy and competitive. Is a long-term trouble. This is where those ideas of free trade agreements, of thinking continentally and thinking collectively come into play, which are going to be, I think, very crucial as well. The role of, I think, the African Union in this regard is going to be very important and worth keeping an eye on as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe Dr. Kananji has something to add on to that.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll try to make it quick. Yeah, there have been concerns about especially Chinese dominance of when it comes to some of rare earth metals and critical minerals, even such as cobalt and stuff like that, where more than 70 to 80% of it is actually, found in the DRC. Now, African countries have found it convenient to actually engage the Chinese, despite some of their unfair, sometimes terms, in terms of contractual terms. And one of the things, because Chinese have been very convincing, so they will ask access to have access to certain minerals, and they're going to put up 1,000-kilometer highway, and you cannot argue with a highway. Now, while lots of concerns will be coming from our Western partners, for instance, there are very few countries on the continent you're going to go and find a French constructed road, an American constructed built road, an airport, built by Brussels or London. They just don't exist anymore. It's not there. And so Africans have been forced to choose between the lesser evil. Now, for them, it's not because they share values with China, absolutely not, especially when it comes to freedoms, democracy, and stuff like that. But those are not the kind of values that are going to put food on the table. And so Africans become very pragmatic when it comes to economic engagement. And so they are going to choose economics over the politics in that sense.
Thank you. I see a few hands, but may I urge you that if you have any questions specifically to Rear Admiral Shaul Chorev, does anyone have a poser for him? Because he's been gracious enough to stay over there. Yeah, please bear with me. And this will be the penultimate question. And I think that, you would be, sir, you would be the last person. Please go ahead.
Admiral, my question is, I'm Admiral Bapna, and I handle the foreign cooperation. My question is related to the point that you made that Turkey and Greece had this EEZ kind of a dispute over their areas. Now, Libya is already, the Government of National Accord, GNA, has agreed to the Turkey's EEZ claims. Why is it that US is supporting the Government of National Accord and is not supporting Libyan National Army, which could actually help Greece, which is an ally of US?
Admiral Chorev, I hope you've heard the question.
Yes, I heard the question. I think that the point is not why the US is not supporting the government. The point is why, not according to the Convention of Law of the Sea, Turkey with Libya is trying to do some kind of delimitation of the border. And the mechanism is, once you have such an agreement and you have the point and you put in the United Nations, it is recognized as a border. They are not taking in consideration where is Rhodes and Crete, and that's one of their, let's say, policy. You can raise the same question with regard to Cyprus, and using it by, let's say, military force. It was not only the US. There was one incident they have with a French frigate. We tried to escort a Cypriot research and evaluation ship in the region, and it created some kind of a crisis within NATO, and the French didn't get the support of the other nations in NATO. So behaving as a bullies in this region, I think that's the way they are doing it, and we don't have to ask the US why they are not trying to push Turkey. They are trying to push Turkey in other aspects, referring to Ukraine, referring to the Bosphorus, referring not to reject Sweden and the Finns to join NATO. So I think the problem is Turkey approach. And I try to mention that Turkey is one of the destabilized forces in the region. From your perspective in India, try to see how they are destabilizing the situation with Pakistan. So I won't refer the question to the US. I refer to the question to the good order at sea and good order in other place. And with your permission, I would like also to refer to another question that raised here. Many people emphasize the piracy problem. I don't think that the piracy problem is the prominent problem that we have in the Indian Ocean, Gulf of Aden. I think that terrorism is the most problem that we have, whether it's done by the Houthi or whether it's done by the Iran Revolutionary Guard Navy. And I think that India suffered also with some kind of such terrorism, and the establishment of the Combined Maritime Force 153, the main mission is try to deal with it. So speaking about piracy, it's good, but I think that we put all of these elements in one sentence: freedom of navigation and good order at sea. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rear Admiral Chorev. One final question, and I would highly commend you to please, in the interest of distributed justice and equity. So if you have a question for Captain Sean Andrews, is that for him?
Admiral Chorev.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So there you go, Admiral. I hope he's not logged off.
Good afternoon, sir. This is Barshan Karmakar from Amity University, Noida. I'm pursuing my PhD at present. So, sir, the question to you is regarding, as you have pointed out, about the IMEC corridor and with respect to the present geopolitical situation that is prevailing around the Gulf and the entire Middle Eastern region, and the present scenario of the global governance model that is prevailing through the entire world. Sir, how do you see the potential and the future of this corridor with respect to the present situation and what it can be in the upcoming times to come? Thank you.
I think that one, may I?
Yes, please. Please go ahead, Admiral.
I think that one of my conclusion is since we see problems in the freedom of navigation in the Red Sea, it's not only from today, it's for several years, we should look for alternative. I hope that one day, weeks, months, the war will end in the region, and the moderate state that will have to benefit from this corridor, namely the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and I emphasize Jordan, and Israel, we come to conclusion that it is an alternative. As a seaman, I should tell you that if you are looking for it from efficiency point of view, it's not efficient as taking a large container ship of more than 20,000 TEU crossing through the Suez Canal. But once you have security problem and you are dealing with connectivity, this initiative, the IMEC initiative, I see for it a very big potential in the future to settle things in the region and to have an alternative road to the Belt and Road Initiative. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think with that, we will close the Q&A session. And my apologies for that. All that I need to do is, in the interest of time, do a quick wrap-up without any further ado. At the outset, my sincere gratitude to all my fellow panelists for the excellent expositions and the responses to the interventions made. What I'll do is I've picked up a few strands as I heard all of them making their presentations, and I will just keep it at the very bare minimum. I think I was very much enthused by what Dr. Timothy Walker said, that increasingly now the demographics are moving towards urban settings, and they are in proximity to the shoreline, right? Which means that while this is a trend, I don't know whether the jury is still out, whether that's how the urban settings. I think this is a challenge which is immensely critical for urban and city planners to grapple with. And I think most parts of the world, they're not doing a good job. But the fact is that this also begs the next question, that how do you stay engaged with the communities locally? How do you bring them on board and build confidence building measures there? Then you also alluded to, I think this has been a universal malevolence, which is in terms of spoofing of the AIS. That's a challenge which all of you are confronting in the navies. We in the Maritime Administration had also that challenge, because under the IMO regulations, you need to keep the AIS on at all times. And if you don't, that's a clear red flag. But that, I think, this is something which we need to put our minds together collectively going forward. Then I think Captain Sean Andrews referred to the disruptions in the supply chain network, if I get you right, Captain. I think this is a point which simply cannot be overemphasized. This is at the very heart of the future engine of economic development and growth. To sustain a very robust and resilient supply chain network is a no-brainer. And I think all we need to do is to put our heads together and make sure that it's possible. But I know that this is an extremely uphill task. There are no easy, quick fix solutions to this. I just referred to some of them earlier on. Then I think Rear Admiral Shaul Chorev did refer to the fact that the Suez is home to 16 undersea cables, which is very critical for the sea lines of communication. Point extremely well taken. He, of course, amplified in response to a question as to how IMEC as a proposition holds potential for the future, despite notwithstanding all the challenges it has along its way. That, I think I will just sort of add a two bit of my own contributions. To sum up, I think the way I see it is that in a resource-based geopolitical environment, it is imperative that it's not just the naval forces, and this is no offense to all of you here. It is equally important that the Maritime Administration should also be taken on board. And far more importantly, the industry stakeholders, they need to be brought along so that it's a collective action and it is well understood going forward as well. Just wanted to also say that finally, that the whole of the government approach, the WOG, that's a proposition which we keep advocating very passionately in India. I think for an issue as salient as this, as far-reaching as this, I think it is again an imperative that we need to bring to bear the whole of the government approach to deal with this challenge in a far more sustainable way. With that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm mindful that the clock has ticked well past 1300 hours. It's about time for me to close. Thank you for being a very indulgent and attentive audience. We've had a very scintillating session, and hopefully you've enjoyed these proceedings as well. I sort of bid adieu to you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I now request Vice Admiral Krishna Swaminathan, AVSM, VSM, the Vice Chief of the Naval Staff, to kindly come up on stage and present tokens of our gratitude and appreciation to all participants of this session. May I request all participants to come up and stand in front of the tables for the ceremony? We will also have a group photograph shortly thereafter. Mr. Timothy Walker. Captain Sean Andrews. Mr. Deepak Shetty. Dr. Tumeni Guruma. And Dr. Hassan Khananje. Admiral Chorev, your live video is being projected on the screen as we're taking a group photograph.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
staying connected for the last hour and a half. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, please join me in giving them a big hand. May I request everyone on stage to please resume their seats in the audience? With that, ladies and gentlemen, we have concluded the fourth session. With much food for thought occupying our minds, it is time to cater to more physical appetite to satisfy one's stomach. Please reassemble here at 1355, 1355 hours sharp. We will now break for lunch.